We're going to do this from up here because we're without a wireless. So, Bob, I see you're here. Is David here yet? Well, we'll do Arbor Day first then, so. Mr. Long, you can come on up. Those of you who don't know, this is Doug Long, our Parks and Rec Director. He's very excited about December 10th. Can't stop talking about it. So we'll be declaring Saturday, December 10th, 2011, Arbor Day. And we have a couple of whereases that need to be read. In 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture, Nebraska, that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. The holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. Arbor Day is now observed through the nation and the world. So we will be, in an effort to expand the city's urban canopy, the San Carlos Lions Club has generously donated $2,000 for the purchase of trees to be planted at Loyola Park as part of the Arbor Day celebration on December 10th, 2011. I urge all citizens to plant and care for trees to gladden the heart and promote the well-being of this and future generations. So therefore be it proclaimed that I, Andy Klein, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, urge all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. There you go, Mr. Long.
Thank you very much.
All right, now I see Mr. Young is here. We will bring Bob Riddell and Dr. David Young up from the San Carlos Treasure Hunters. How you guys doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to have you guys talking to the mic a bit too, so you can explain the Treasure Hunters a bit.
Sure.
But we have two proclamations here commending Bob Riddell and Dr. David Young for the San Carlos Treasure Hunters. San Carlos Treasure Hunters was developed by Bob Riddell in 2007 to establish an exciting treasure hunt in the city of San Carlos while promoting an education of the town's rich history and great parks. Bob Riddell was joined by Dr. David Young shortly thereafter in 2008 as the co-sponsor of the event. Since that time, the treasure hunting teams have grown from 35 teams with 96 children and 39 adults to 72 teams with 210 children and 130 adults. So therefore be it proclaimed by myself, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, that Dr. David Young and Bob Riddell are hereby commended for sponsoring the Treasure Hunters event, engaging our young citizens to become better educated about their town, and for encouraging participation in a unique and entertaining way. Here you go, David. You want to talk a little bit about Treasure Hunters?
Sure. As Andy mentioned there, Treasure Hunters was developed in 2007 as a way for, I was really looking for a way for kids to become more involved in San Carlos, and we felt there was kind of a demographic there that there's a lot for kids to do under the age of 10 in San Carlos. Once they get a little older, that's a little bit more difficult. And so we wanted a fun, interactive event where kids could also do something fun with their parents as it becomes a little bit more challenging at that age. And we kind of blended the city's history with the park system. And each year we have a different theme, and we've noticed that kind of a fictional theme with a little bit of a scary villain works real well for the kids. And we've been very pleased with the results, and we feel we have, out of all the cities, probably the kids that are most educated on their history. You'd be amazed at how well these kids read the book, and they discover the museum and the park system. And so it's something that Dave and I have been very proud of, and hopefully we'll be able to do for years to come. So I appreciate the recognition. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Okay, well, so that's the meeting. Everyone have a good night. No, moving on to item number 6, public comments. Oh, I missed a public speaker slip. Scott Marsters. Sorry, Scott, they left. I didn't see it, but if you want to come up and we have for 5B, the Lions Club. You got to flag me down, Scott.
Good evening, City Council members and Mayor Klein. Tonight I'm here to representing the San Carlos Lions Club and to present the city with a $2,000 check for planting trees in Loyola Park. Earlier this year, the Lions International President challenged the Lions clubs around the world to commit to planting 1 million trees. The Lions responded the way Lions respond and have committed to planting over 4 million trees worldwide. The San Carlos Lions has funded the planting of over 1,000 trees. This check will fund the planting of trees in Loyola Park to shade the newly renovated children's play area. Thank you very much for doing that. The $2,000 came mostly from donations at our recent Tri-Trip fundraiser. I want to especially acknowledge Lion Emil Torres and his wife Betty for their help. So please accept this $2,000 check.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Marsters, and make sure to thank the Lions Club from us. Okay, Scott, you want to stick up here? We're at item 6. We're at public comment, and so we have Scott Marsters, and I believe that's it for public comment on item number 6. Yep.
Tonight, I would like to announce the formation of the newest service club in San Carlos, the San Carlos Leos Club. The San Carlos Leos Club is currently made up of 30 12 to 18-year-old young men and women, and they will be accepting their charter from our district governor on December 12th. The club is still accepting youth interested in community service, so please call 597-1777 and leave a message if you're interested in becoming part of a group that's interested in community service. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. So again, you're greatly appreciated for all your civic duty that you do. So we'll be moving on to the consent calendar, which is item number 7. We'll be pulling 7F, as requested by the public. Does any other council members wish to pull anything? Okay, seeing none, can I get a motion for everything else?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve item 7A, B, C, D, E, and G in the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a public comment slip for item 7S. David Krabby?
Yeah, hi. I'm David Crabb. I live on 289 Crestview Drive in San Carlos. I saw this and I thought we should maybe have some discussion about it. I don't know. I'm assuming that the $129,000 will be reimbursed by the developer at some point. But I'm concerned that we're proceeding with the addendum to the EIR, and we all know that the main problem with the project from the neighbors, especially the east side's position, was the basic architectural character of the buildings. And to this point, I have no understanding that the developer has tried to meet with the east side people and carry this any further to try to refine their design. And so I'm kind of wondering, we hadn't spent $129,000 for this EIR, we're still working off the same project we had before. And so it just seemed like maybe we should think about it a little bit. And also, I'm kind of $129,000 for an addendum? It just strikes me as being awfully expensive.
All right, Mr. Crabbe, we're going to have some answers for you here. I'm going to let Mr. Savay chime in, but in the staff report, it does point out that this is a pass-through, so we're not actually paying the money. The developer, Legacy Partners, will be paying the full freight of this. But Mr. Savay can talk a little bit about where we are in that project and why this is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Yes, this is a request to continue and finalize the environmental impact report and respond to the comments that were received on the draft environmental impact report. And there were hundreds, literally hundreds of comments that need to be responded to, and also suggestions for the review of different things like shadowing effects, visual studies, and other issues, noise. And the city's obligated to move forward with the environmental impact report. We have a valid application. State law requires that cities move forward with development projects. And so, but the dialogue continues. This is one component of the project. It's the first part. It would be the environmental certification would come forward to the Planning Commission and City Council at public hearings, and so the environmental impacts would be vetted first, and then the project entitlements, the design, the development, the height, scale of the buildings, then would come after that. And so,
Mr. Survey, so,
Yes.
to paraphrase, in no way is this an endorsement of the project. This is just the procedure that we have in place in this city for when projects do come forward.
that's correct. Every city in the state of California has to abide by certain requirements like this one.
And in no way does this cost us any money. The Legacy Partners is footing the bill for this,
That's
correct?
correct. They are paying us up front for the cost of the report.
Okay, we have another public comment, but we'll get to that in a second. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Spey?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Fuller?
Let me apologize to the council for not having seen this on the agenda. I just want to add that I appreciate Mr. Crabbee's comments, and the EIR is something that we see as basically a fraudulent document put together by PBS&J, which was just a way to basically say there were no significant adverse impacts to our neighborhood from this project. And so that finding is so egregious that any discussion, this just has to, it's important to bring that up. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Are there any questions or comments from council members? Seeing none, can we get a motion? Can
Make a motion to approve item 7F.
we have a second? All right, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 8, reports to council. Mr. Maltby, we have none, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, moving on to 9A, public hearing. Consideration of appeal of Planning Commission approval of a conditional use permit and architectural review permitting 6 new antennas co-locating on the 2 existing antenna support structures at 260 Shelford, continued from October 24th, 2011. We have a staff report? Ms. Costas?
Yes, just one moment, please.
You guys are a team.
I'm not skilled in the
Good thing I'm not there.
system here.
Thumbs.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you. Good evening, council members. Lisa Costa-Sanders, Principal Planner. The item before you is the appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to approve a conditional use permit as well as an architectural review permit. The appeal was from the June 6th Planning Commission meeting. As I indicated on the June Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission approved the use permit and architectural review permit to allow AT&T to install 6 new panel antennas onto an existing structure at 260 Shelford Avenue. That decision was appealed to the City Council, and the City Council did conduct a public hearing on October 24th where you did take the staff presentation, the applicant's statement, as well as from the city's peer review consultant, as well as heard some public comment. You then continued that to allow some additional public comment at this evening's meeting. Just to refresh your memory, it is 6 new panel antennas. They're going to do a 10-foot extension on the existing structure that's maintained by Sprint and Nextel. The maximum height of the structure with the extension would be 36 feet. There is some slope to the site, so generally the structure height would be 34 feet 3 inches, but at the highest point it would be 36 inches from the lowest point of the grade. And the new equipment would be surrounded by an 8-foot tall concrete block wall for the equipment. Just the visual of the proposal. You see here's the extension and the new antennas located at the top at this location, 6 in total. We do have some additional information since your October 24th meeting. We do have in the packet a letter from AT&T that indicates that no trees will be removed at the site. As you recall, there was some discussion on an oak tree on the property. They're indicating that they will not be needing to remove that during the course of construction. Also written confirmation that no landscaping is intended to be removed, but we also have a condition in your conditional use permit certificate, condition number 9, that ensures if any landscaping is to be removed, it does need to be replaced. And then to clarify, the support structure is currently of 5-inch diameter poles, and they intend to replace that with new 8-inch poles, and that would accommodate the new AT&T antennas. There was also a question about grading for the equipment, and that's estimated at 32 cubic yards. Finally, there's also a letter from the applicant's noise consultant clarifying the sound. They did take the sound estimate with all the equipment at the site operating at the same time. would be 44.9 dBA, but then when you add that 8-foot new concrete enclosure, it would reduce to 39.9 dBA, and that is below our most restrictive nighttime noise limit of 45 dBA. So they would comply with the noise regulations. Staff does recommend that the City Council deny the appeal, thereby upholding the decision of the Planning Commission to approve the conditional use permit as well as the architecture review permit for the new wireless antennas for AT&T at 260 Shelford. Be happy to try to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from council members for staff? Okay. Yes, Mr. Grocott.
I have one. This might lead to the applicant, actually, but the wording in their response regarding the existing oak tree, can you put that back up there? I think it was worded up there the same way it was worded in our staff report.
No trees will be removed, and then they're anticipating no landscaping. So
Okay.
it may be best to have the applicant expand on that for you.
Right.
Okay, well, then we will bring the applicant up to answer that question, and we'll do the applicant. We're going to do public comment from the appellant after that. So I don't know who's speaking for you tonight.
Sure. So, Councilmember Grocott, your question is whether any trees will be removed, and we've said definitively that they will not. And as far as landscaping goes, we have no plans to remove any landscaping. If some accidentally gets removed, if some has to be removed in the course of construction, we are required to replace it. Does that answer your question?
It does not.
What's your question?
The question I had was regarding the oak tree,
Okay.
because, see, let me go find your letter. Give me one moment. I gotta find the letter here. So regarding the removal, I'm reading from the letter. Regarding the removal of trees, AT&T does not anticipate removing any trees in order to install its antenna. I was curious if there had been, maybe this gets to staff or you as the applicant, if there had been any use of an arborist at the site to look at the root structure of that oak relative to where the pad is intended to be put, where you put the pad in the retaining wall, and if that will have any impact on that tree's root structure or the
I'm
health
going
of the
to
tree.
defer to our project manager
Okay.
on that point.
My name is Matthew Paulin with Erickson Incorporated. We have not, unless I'm mistaken, employed an arborist on this project, but based on our experience in building these sites on structures, or on sites that have trees like that oak tree, we don't anticipate that we'll be disturbing the root structure.
Right. Can staff speak to that at all?
The city does have a consulting arborist that we employ, so that's certainly something that we can monitor during construction and ensure that no roots are damaged during the course of construction. There's also construction methods they could use if it does become close to the roots, such as hand digging or air spading, to make sure they don't cut any of those root structures. So that's something we can definitely alert the building department to make sure we closely monitor during the course of construction, make sure there's no damage to any of the oak trees.
Right.
Are there any other questions for the applicant?
Are we going to get another chance, or is this it?
I'd prefer if you could ask now.
Okay. Well, okay, because I was going to ask him about the aesthetics, or do you want to wait on that?
We can wait on that if you'd like.
Okay.
Okay. So if there's no other non-aesthetic questions, we will go to, we have some speaker slips, and since we have a group of appellants, we'll give you guys some extra time, and I know Mr. Opelenik wasn't here 2 weeks ago, so we'll start with June O., Mr. Opelenik, and then Frank Hensley, as would like to come up.
Good evening. See if I can. So the last time, 3 weeks ago when I was here, I spoke first, and then several other people spoke later, and I haven't had a chance to
speak after. So I just wanted to recap a little bit about, what was said after, and I wanted to say some things about that. Sorry, what folder is it?
Microsoft Edge.
Okay, so I'm here to appeal the application as it was passed by the Planning Commission in June. So I have a copy of that application. I'm going to open it up here for reference. And I know that there are some changes on it recently. The admission, basically, that the documentation that we found from 1998 did show that it was a 5-inch diameter frame, and that their application incorrectly said that it was an 8-inch diameter frame. And now they are admitting so much that they made that mistake, and they want to correct that. That, as I said 3 weeks ago, that is not anywhere in this application. The construction, the level of all of the effort that's going to have to happen to remove those 5-inch diameter frame, put in new foundation, is something that nobody has ever discussed. And this is the plan that got passed 5-0 in the Planning Commission. So we don't feel that this application reflects what the current plan is right now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the roots and the damage to them. Let's see here. Oh, you know what? I don't think I have it. Shoot, I don't have it with me. I had a satellite photo of the area, and it showed that the tree was only about 3 feet away from the corner of the site. And the root system the tree is here.
Is there any, Mr. O, can you zoom that in for us? Sure. Thank you.
So the tree is in this area, and they say that the center of the tree is right about here or so, either within this V or outside the V. This is underground cabling that they are proposing. I don't think that hand digging is going to allow this kind of plan to go forward with the tree that we now know is there. This plan did not have that in there. We now know it's there. In addition, this tree is not straight up with the big canopy. It comes out at the base. So these cabinets are about 6 feet high. When the center of the tree is here and the limb comes out, you don't get a 6-foot clearance until about here. Essentially, this platform does not represent what can possibly happen if that tree is allowed to remain. About 40% of this platform would have to be changed or altered in any way. So that really changes the entire complexion of this entire application. What are they going to do with the cabling? What are they going to do with this area? They're just going to shift it like they said that they would. Is that possible? I don't know. This application does not address any of these new findings that we've had in the last few months since this was approved in June. Now, we, the public, found that the inconsistency with the frame, 5 inches versus 8 inches, we found that through the records. No one had mentioned that before. if this council allows this application to go forward tonight, the public will not have any more say in the proceedings. I think we've shown that by being involved, we can actually see a lot of the inconsistencies and a lot of problems with this application. We have no problem if they want to reapply. But to then say that the application should go forward, that the parties should go in and hash the details out, I just do not believe that the public's interest will be met. Okay?
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowe. Next, we have Mr. Opalenik, followed by Mr. Hensley, and then Mr. Bachman.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Before I start, I'd like to mention that there was an extensive community report that was presented. I didn't see that in the public record, and I would like to see that entered into the public record as AT&T had their records entered in for future reference. So I just want to make that little point up front.
We did, but we all did receive it, so it has.
You did receive it, yeah, I just didn't see it in the public record, so thank you very much. I want to go back to the Planning Commission and the meeting that we had there. There were numerous errors in the application for the AT&T tower. We brought that up. I personally, at the very end, closed and said, and I turned to Mr. Rios and the AT&T person that were there, and I said, the community would be happy to work with you on, getting this application, polished up, because it was very rough. There were a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of errors in it. We, the community, thought it was going to go back to planning and do all the work that the community had to do to clean this up. It didn't. It passed 5-0. The two most alarming untruths in the application are, and these are exact quotes from the application, under the architectural review section, 18.118.070A, and this is from their application. Even with the increased height, which is 13 feet, it's not 10, according to the blueprints, the structure will not be visible above the existing vegetation. Truly not true. You've seen the photographs, you've been to the site. Their own photographs point out the fact that it will stick out dramatically. Second, section 18118.030F. This is a quote again. In that no new tower antenna support structure is proposed as part of this project. Their words. These are not minor details, as stated by the planning department in the last meeting. These are major details. Attorneys for AT&T, the letter dated that's in the public record just currently, and it's from Holland and Knight, state in the public record, the existing poles are 5 inches in diameter. These poles will be replaced with 8-inch poles to accommodate the additional load, and their structural integrity will be evaluated through the city building process, which will be out of the public review. Okay? By replacing 5-inch poles, you've been up there, I think, with 8-inch, they're going to have to tear the foundation out. More grading, more large equipment. Basically, this is a teardown project. This is not co-location. We're going to add some, panels on top of an existing antenna. This is a teardown. If it's going to be a teardown, let them put up a nice tree or something. Let them camouflage it. They want to try to get away in the cheapest way possible, and it's just not right for the community and doesn't go along with the community character. Okay, so how much more excavation needs to be done if they tear this whole thing down and have to tear out the foundation? They quoted 15-year-old safety permits. This dramatically changes the entire application and the scope of the project. With that in mind, here are the words straight from the conditional use permit that AT&T was supposed to adhere to. The draft conditional use permit, first clause, the plans submitted for a building permit shall be consistent with the plans approved by the Planning Commission on June 6, 2011. Because of all the current and previous public comment, the council should uphold Mr. O's appeal and deny AT&T's current application and let AT&T reapply with a clean application with a possible fake tree or other type of applications that they have on other Cal Water sites. Mr. Lewis, in your industry, you wouldn't let a storyboard not match to a script. You wouldn't fund it. Mr. Gaselli, Sunbeam Homes, you wouldn't advertise a 3-bedroom house and then try to sell it as a 2-bedroom house. You wouldn't, Mr. Mayor Klein, you wouldn't sell an insurance policy and have that policy say, well, it's only good as long as you're alive. Mr. Royce, when you were at HP, you wouldn't sell a color copier and have it print in black and white and say it's color. Mr. Grocott, and in your building practice, this wouldn't fly at all. So it shouldn't fly here either. And I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for the extra time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Opalenik. Next, we have Mr. Hensley, followed by Mr. Bachman.
Good evening. I have just a couple of quick points. Hopefully I'll make them as quickly as possible. So I'm concerned by all the inconsistencies with what's been submitted. I'm concerned by what's available in the public record. I'm concerned about all the discussions we've had specifically about the Sprint and Nextel site and how the documentation still hasn't appeared for building the site up there, building the building, any of that. Today, just before coming up here, I went on the FCC website and looked for antenna structure registration. I still have not seen anything on the FCC website for the Sprint Nextel towers, antenna structure, anything along that line. I went up there specifically to be able to make sure I was able to speak intelligently about all the towers up there. I have before me the registration for the T-Mobile site. From that, I was able to look at all the other sites, and I'm able to find the San Carlos two-way radio communications tower that's owned by American Tower, the Verizon site, but nothing for Nextel or Verizon within 1.6 kilometers of that location. My point is that there's so much wrong with the site. There's so much wrong in the public record. There's so much wrong with the FCC that continuing to take a proposal that has so many errors that we, the public, have had to find, that the planning department, for one reason or another, didn't find, is just concerning. I'm concerned about the statement of if the tree gets damaged, the heritage oak tree gets damaged, that they'll replace it. How do you replace a heritage oak tree? It's hard to do. At the last meeting, we talked about alternative antennas, and we talked about alternative sites, and I still have yet to see anything that really speaks to that. Knowing enough about electronics and RF that I do, there's ways that they can share the antennas that are up there that are owned by Sprint. There's ways that can interlead the antennas. If they don't choose to do that, if Sprint doesn't care to enter those negotiations, then absolutely a new structure may have to be built, and we're not opposed to that. What we're opposed to is maintaining the overall integrity of the environment up there, maintaining our home values, making sure that the neighborhood still looks nice and clean, and the aesthetic values. There are other options. They can certainly mount antennas on the towers, on the water tanks, and paint them to blend in with the tanks. We've talked about the fake trees. In fact, I was in the city of Los Altos Hills yesterday, and on the city property, right next to the city council chambers there was a fake tree that is loaded not only with cellular antennas, but two-way radio antennas. In fact, I believe some of the city's communications are on that particular tree. There's a great article for it, and if you're interested in that, I'm happy to send that to you, because it's available on the web. My point is, we're not opposed to having AT&T there. They definitely will give us great coverage. We just would like to make sure that we're being heard. We would like to make sure that the aesthetics are maintained. The other thing that is also concerning to me is that as we have continued to dig around and do all of our research, we're also finding more and more things that lead to alleged relationships with Cal Water executives, not only with the CEO, but also members of the board, as well as members of the Planning Commission in this city. And it's really alarming to know all the Cal Water sites that are in the city that have to go through the planning department and everything that's gone on. I don't know what has happened. I don't know that anything illegal has happened, but it does make one question. My final point is that with so many things with this site, it just sounds like the best thing to do is to deny the request, have them go back, have them reapply, and at which point we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hensley. We're now going to go back to our 2 minutes because our appellants are done. So, Mr. Bachman, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, and good evening. My name is Leon Beachman, and no problem, it looks like Bachman. And I am here representing the Wireless Communications Initiative, which is part of Joint Venture Silicon Valley. And I'm actually here to introduce myself because what we are interested in doing is working with communities to improve our wireless infrastructure. We've been working about the last couple of years to do what we can to make that process a little bit easier for you, the decision makers, and we've been working with staff to come up with policies, procedures that make it easier for the wireless carriers to work with the cities. And so we're looking forward to doing that here in San Carlos. I am very much wanting to see if we can make a difference. I think the key thing that we want to impress upon people is create a sense of urgency. Because you may know that there are 7 billion people in the world. There are 5 billion wireless telephones already. And as our administration in D.C. and other people have noticed, there was an editorial about Thomas Friedman not too long ago. This region is the leader in wireless communications. Unfortunately, we don't have the infrastructure that represents our leadership. And we think if we're going to keep that leadership and the jobs that it involves, the FCC is estimating that by 2015, the market for applications on wireless phones will be a $38 billion industry. It was about a $6 billion industry last year. So a lot of that economic impact will be felt right here in Silicon Valley. We think we should be very proactive in making sure that our infrastructure represents the kind of economy that we would like to have. I'll close by saying is that I empathize with you. I've been through some of these meetings. Unfortunately, rarely will you ever see a perfect solution where everybody agrees that this is the right way to do it. You will certainly have to make that decision on how to best satisfy the needs of your city, but invariably you will have people who will be speaking on both sides of the issue. And so what we try to do is at least make sure that people who are speaking on either side are as informed as they can be about the issues and what this means to our region. So I look forward to working with you, and if there's any help that Joint Venture, myself, or the Wireless Communications Initiative can be, as you move forward, we are here to help you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Beachman. I see Mr. Randall's gearing up. So, Mr. Randall. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Randall. Thank you for coming.
Brian Randall, San Carlos. Mr. Mayor, City Council members, my original observation made to you all several months ago was that the city, with the city planning department, favored these companies and put them before the citizens. And I would now say conspired to do that. Back to the building, I suggested put a roof on it. I still see there's no roof on it, so some noise will come out over the top. Regarding the 36 feet high new antennas, there is a dispute over their visibility over the surrounding trees. Why don't, and why haven't they used these orange plastic panels erected to show the proposed height of houses before construction? It will be a simple confirmation one way or the other. One other small point. Over the years, they've never had a portable potty up there, you see. And people do have to urinate. When nature calls, and defecate. So, come on, let's have a portable potty up there. But that's just a small point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Randall. Mr. Rubin, since there's no more public comment, would this be the appropriate time to close the public hearing?
Yes, it would be appropriate time.
And we'll still be able to ask AT&T questions, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, before you deliberate, I just want to address a couple of comments that were made by the public.
Absolutely, Mr. Rubin.
There's been this happened at a couple of meetings now where there's been an allegation of alleged wrongdoing by staff with regard to the processing of this application and prior applications. I'd like to assure the council that I've conducted an investigation of the issue of the staff member that had been involved in the prior application, and I found no conflict of interest with that. And that staff member, in an abundance of caution, has not been involved at all in this application. The second issue is there was an allegation tonight that there was some sort of conspiracy, and it's completely unfounded without any factual support of it. I think that's a pretty strong allegation to make against staff, that there's some sort of conspiracy. There hasn't been any conspiracy. Staff dutifully processes these types of applications and does their best job to process them and provide the information to the council that you need to make a decision. And I thought that needed to be said for the record. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rubens. So we'll now move to questions. I know, Mr. Grisilli, you have some for the carrier.
Oh, yeah. I actually have one for Lisa. I'm sorry. Could I ask you a question? So it's been talked about tonight that what we're looking at tonight, the application is a little different from what was originally set up, possibly in June or whenever. Is this a normal situation, or is this an abnormal situation where applications get processed and then they change along the way? Maybe they never even come to us or the Planning Commission, but they do change in a lot of ways. Is that a normal situation, or?
It certainly does happen, and I believe that's why the wording in the use permit is it needs to be in substantial conformance to the plans. And the example tonight is the difference between the 5-inch and the 8-inch.
Sure.
The structure is still generally the same size, but the support poles are slightly larger than was presented before you. It happens on new single-family homes. During the course of construction, the homeowner says, oh, well, here's an opportunity to put in a bay window, and that's a relatively minor change that staff can approve. But if it added another room, significant height change, we're certainly going to take it back through the review process. So that does happen,
Okay, thank you.
certainly.
And then I had a question for...
Well, hold on. Before you sit down, Lisa, does anyone have any more comments for staff or questions?
Yes,
Because
I
I'd like,
do.
instead of us doing this ping pong
Okay,
thing.
sorry.
Yeah, Mr.
We need to
Grocott?
have it back and forth.
I want to ask staff then about the tree, because the oak tree, it wasn't shown on this drawing, it's not on this drawing. I haven't seen it in any of the drawings, and yet, I just know from experience with, you mentioned like in a residential application, well, in a residential application, if you had a heritage oak on your site, you're required to show it on your site plan. And then, as you mentioned later, when, that's to the planning department. When you make your planning application, you have to show heritage trees on your plans. And then later, when you submit to building, as you referenced, you have to submit a protection plan for that tree and how you're going to protect that tree during construction. So I wouldn't be looking for that protection plan, because this isn't an application to the building department, but it is an application to the planning department, and there's no indication on here whatsoever of the location of the oak tree, the size of the oak tree, and any of that. And this is as was alluded to, it's a very large tree. It's on the order of a valley oak, meaning the branches, it's multi-trunked, it goes up, and then as valley oaks are apt to do, the branches go back down to the ground and touch the ground. That's how the tree supports itself. And that's the trouble I'm having is, I'm being told, well, if something happens to the tree, we'll make every effort to protect it, and so on and so forth, which I can understand, but I also understand mistakes happen. Years ago we had the sign that was supposed to stay, the marquee sign at the theater project down there where our Chamber of Commerce is located, and during construction the sign fell down, broke, it's gone. You can't replace things like that. You can't replace an oak tree like this. And my concern is that I'm looking at where the pad is and not knowing exactly where the tree is. I could see where some of these branches that go up and then go back down to the ground, I guess they'd have to be cut. And I'm not an arborist. You're not an arborist. How is that tree going to survive the location of this pad? And as was mentioned, the cabling too. I'm not an engineer. I don't know the extent of these trenches that need to be cut for the cable lines, but as they're shown on there, and I'm thinking of this oak tree, and it's, I'm working on a project right now, I'll tell you, in San Carlos. A Deodora is on the site. It's huge. It's a 50-inch diameter Deodora. My recommendation to the client, let's do pier and grade beam instead of a typical foundation. And why? Because a tree like that, as large as its canopy is, generally that's how large its root structure is as well. It has a taproot that goes down, but the roots go across the ground and they match the canopy. You have to think of that, and if you cut those major roots, you kill the tree. So that's my concern. I know I've been long, but if you could.
Well, we certainly do appreciate that comment, and I can't speak to why the tree is not represented on the plan, but we do have a suggestion to move forward to add a condition that the applicant provide an arborist report prior to the building permit submittal of that oak tree, and specifically the new construction, as well as the arborist shall be present on site during the course of grading to ensure that there's no damage caused to the oak tree. And that way you have that expert providing that opinion prior to building permit submittal. You also could have that expert on site to make sure that the construction is in a manner that does not cause harm to the tree.
Okay, so then I have two questions. One might be for you and one might be for, I don't know, the city attorney or somebody. Let's suppose the arborist goes up there, looks at the location, looks at what's being proposed, and says either you can't do the construction at all, you'll kill the tree, or you can do the construction, but you're going to have to move this pad way over here. And then I hear what the applicants are saying is, now we have a different project than was presented all the way back in June to the Planning Commission, if that happens. So question one is, suppose the arborist does come to that conclusion that given where the pad is shown, given where the cabling is shown, you can't do the project as drawn. You either change the project or you don't do it all because we have to save this tree. So that's a question for, I assume, for you. Mm-hmm. My other question, I don't think you're going to be able to handle, no offense, but maybe the city attorney could jump in here. What do we do for the neighborhood if we go ahead with the construction and we do all the measures that are being talked about, but things happen? Mistakes get made, or what you think is going to work, even if we're an arborist. No science is perfect. And the tree dies, and it's killed, and now it's gone. And now this neighborhood not only doesn't have the tree in the neighborhood that they had, it also changes this application because all the pictures that have been shown and the views that have been shown are based upon vegetation hiding this building, hiding the tower, because you're looking up through trees, and so forth. What recourse do we have in protection for our residents as a council or as a city to pay them back somehow and give them what they had before?
So to answer the first question, I think it's going to depend on the extent of how much that pad would need to move. If it was a very minor tweak, a couple of feet, then that's certainly something we can handle at staff level. If it's a significant shift, though, it would need to go back through the Planning Commission, or depending on how this is worded, the City Council. And also, we'd need to make sure on where it moved, the equipment would still need to meet the noise standards. So there's a couple of factors that we'll need to take a look at, and then I'll defer maybe the second item to the city attorney.
Before the city attorney jumps in, then from what you're saying, if we were to approve this, could we make it, would you come back with a recommendation on how much it could move without having to go through a review process again? Or is that something that we can make a recommendation on as a council?
That's a judgment call that staff would make when we were reviewing it on if it was a very minor shift of a few feet. If it's going to be in the order of magnitude of 10 feet or so, it may be significant enough to may need to come back.
So that's not a condition that we would necessarily pass on tonight?
Defer to the city attorney.
Well, what I'm hearing...
Hold on, Ms. Rooms, Ms. Sanders, don't sit down yet. I'm sure you might have a couple more questions.
Very good.
What I think you're driving at, Councilmember Grocott, is, at least speaking for yourself as a council member, that you have a strong desire to support the neighborhood's efforts to preserve that tree. So what we've traditionally done in these types of applications is condition the application that the tree be preserved, and then the arborist is the expert that helps to determine the measures that are required to keep that tree protected. You're also, I think, driving at another issue is the aesthetics of that tree remaining in place are very important for your decision in this. And I think one of the other conditions that I've seen come in that are consistent with our municipal code for replacement of heritage trees is that the building official and the city arborist, if something in the future were to happen to that tree, regardless of whether it's construction related or it could just be that a storm knocks the tree down or something in the future, our municipal code would provide for replacement trees for that location that maybe, there are sizes and we could ensure that the appropriate size box trees could go in to replace that. But so we, in short, strong conditions in this application, and then you could also include conditions of compliance with the code, including replacement trees to properly screen the installation.
Okay, and so I'll give it back. We may come back to that. If,
Thank you, Mr. Grocott. Ms. Royce, do you have any questions for staff? Mr. Grisilli?
No.
Mr. Lewis? Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to questions for AT&T. Do you have anything, Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, the question I have is, was an artificial tree tower ever considered?
Yes, an artificial tree tower was considered. However, the impacts from an artificial tree tower are much greater than co-locating on the existing antennas, and so it was ruled out on that basis. But if you guys would indulge me for just a moment, I have some
Can
photos.
I just follow up on that real quick?
Sure.
Can you be more specific?
The amount of digging that has to occur in order to put up an artificial tree, the trenching that has to occur, and the foundation that's associated with it, the impacts of that are greater than just co-locating the antennas on top of the existing.
I guess it would just be nice to have more specifics on that, just because there's a long-term aesthetic impact on the neighborhood to have non-camouflaged towers up there, and there might be a short-term impact that we could sort of judge and balance if we knew what that was.
Sure. I'm going to defer to our project manager here.
Thank you. When we go into a site like this, we try and minimize impact on the site, both visually, aesthetically, construction duration, and intensity. In order to put in an artificial tree pole, it's much more involved, it takes longer, it disrupts more soil. You're probably talking about a 20 to 30 foot deep, 4 foot wide caisson that needs to be drilled. A huge auger has to come out and remove all that soil, and cement has to be poured, and a steel caisson sunk into the ground. So in this case, as I said, we try and minimize impact, and we felt it best to use the existing structure.
So in going from a 5-inch pole to an 8-inch pole, how much bigger does that foundational base have to be?
I can't tell you at this point. I'm not an engineer. That's something that we would typically handle through the building department process, the building application process.
Can you approximate it like you just did the tree tower for me?
I really can't because I'm not familiar with the existing structure there. As far as what's in the ground, there would have to be some investigation done. There may also be ways to retrofit that existing structure to go to an effective 8-inch diameter.
But certainly there's potential at this point that we have two, that's several locations where we have a 5-inch pole with a certain foundational base, by going up by 40% or whatever the number is, there's a chance that foundationally there's going to have to be much greater impact just in order to accommodate the new 8-inch poles, I would imagine.
I really can't say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are those all your questions, Mr. Lewis, for AT&T? Mr. Grisilli, do you have
I'm
any?
going to pile on because how wide's the tree? This artificial tree that you can't build. How wide is it? More than 8 inches?
Usually they're 3 to 4 feet in diameter.
3 or 4 feet? Why does it have to be 3 or 4 feet?
That's just sort of an industry standard, building standard.
So explain it to me. I apologize. I'm not an engineer.
okay.
So it's 3 or 4 feet, which is, that's 3 feet. I don't know. Okay, that's the tree. Then you slip the pole in the middle of it? Or how does it go?
No, it's a steel structure. It's a steel pole camouflaged to look like a tree.
So you don't add a camouflage. It is actually the structure.
Correct.
The tree itself is the electronic thingamajigger.
No, it's the support structure for the antennas. We then hang antennas off the diameter of the tree within
So you hang it on the
the
tree.
branches.
What I'm saying is you hang it on the tree. There's no pole though. There's no 8-inch pole. There's no pole at all.
No.
So you hang it on the tree.
The pole is literally a hollow steel pole.
I understand.
3 feet in
I'm
diameter.
just trying to, pardon my
Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
terminology is poor. I
That's
apologize.
okay.
What you're saying is the tree has to be extremely wide because you're hanging the antennas or what the thingamajiggers on it.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not like you put an 8-inch pole up and just put a tree up around to cover it.
No.
Can't do that.
No.
Can't do that, or you're not aware of it. How to do
Never
it.
seen it done.
Never seen it done.
Yeah, but it's a painted steel pole to look like a tree
Correct.
blended with the environment,
Just
right?
asking. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, and then they've got fake, branches hanging off it, and then within those branches and the pole, they hide the cell towers. In the Burton Park, we have an example, I believe.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Royce, do you have questions for AT&T? Mr. Grocott, do you have questions for AT&T?
Yes.
Okay.
And just a comment. I was in Pollock Pines not very long ago and took a run through the woods, and I saw a tree that caught my attention, and it was because it was fake, and it was a
Looked a little off.
yeah, it was one of these towers, but my gosh, I don't recall it being 3 feet in diameter. To me, it looked like sort of a giant sequoia in size, and then it had these little branches off of it. I'd be, not to contest with the man necessarily, but I don't know. It didn't seem to me like it was 3 feet in diameter. The question I have is related to the staff report. Where is this? Get back.
Mr. Grocott, while you're waiting,
Yeah. Oh, I
before
got
we
it.
get into this AT&T thing, or after we get into the AT&T
Yeah.
thing, we do have a picture of what the fake tree is, so Mr. Grisilli will get you,
Great.
you can see what it looks like. But you can keep going, Mr. Grocott.
Thank you. So, in our staff report on page 2, it said that the staff requested AT&T consider providing the following, and it had 6 items, and the 6th item was erection of a story pole, as was mentioned down here, and I had mentioned it at the last meeting. And then it says AT&T's response to the items is in attachment 2, and so I went and found attachment 2, and AT&T didn't say boo about story poles.
Your question
Why
couldn't
not?
have been better timed. This is what we have for you here.
All right.
We have a few photo simulations that were submitted as part of the application, but these are in color, and I can walk you through what they're showing. This first thing is an aerial view of 260 Shelford, so you can see where the existing water towers are. Here, within this red circle is where the existing towers are that we will be appending to. This is Anchor Lane down here, and this is Lyndhurst up here. So first, we're going to take a view from Anchor Lane. So this is what it looks like now, and
Is that standing in the middle of the street?
yes,
So
all our
that's
pictures.
not standing on someone's front property?
Correct. All the pictures are taken from the public right-of-way. It's a little bit difficult to see from a distance, or perhaps your eyes are better than mine, but you can see a little bit of one of the water towers here and one of the water towers there. So that's what you can see from here right now, looking north from Anchor Lane. Adding the antenna that we have proposed, you can see a little tiny bit of it here through the branches. So that's what the proposal is. The next view we're going to take is from here, which is also taken from the public right-of-way, and this is from Lyndhurst. Here's what their existing view is. So you can see a little bit of the water tower peeking out over here. This is Verizon's tower. This is T-Mobile's tower. This is a utility tower. And here is where our proposed antenna will be. So it'll be peeking out a little bit from behind that tree over there.
Now, who did these photo simulations? They were done by AT&T, I imagine, not an independent?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I need to know. So, Mr. Grocott, do you have more questions?
Well, I appreciate the photos. They were in the original application, and I knew the limitation of the photos before you presented them tonight. So, again, I mentioned about story poles, and there was no comment in the letter at all about story poles, not even go look at our photo simulations. We feel like we've already addressed that issue. There was nothing said, and I'm wondering why.
Because we had about 24 hours to respond to that letter, and we had to get all our responses together. So we were trying to be as responsive as we could to the planning department.
Okay.
And we're showing you now what the simulations would be.
Okay. Do you have any more questions, Mr. Grocott? Mr. Weiss? Mr. Grisilli? Are you good?
All right, now,
Okay, Mr. Lewis, you're okay? Okay, I have no questions. Thank you very much. So we will start with discussion. Mr. Lewis, can we start with you?
Well, I have an aesthetic concern. I mean, frankly, you know, from sitting up here, I think it's our job to sort of, you know, protect neighborhoods, property values, and impacts on all of those things. And my, you know, one of the concerns from the start with these kind of antennas and so forth is how restricted we are in our response as it is. And I certainly wish that we could get some help from the federal government, but we're limited. But I would say to me, this is a clear case where we have aesthetic technology that can make less of an impact on the neighborhoods. And I think it's commiserate upon us to sort of hold a San Carlos standard to these kind of the proliferation of self-antennas. I know, Mr. Grocott, you talked about this from the microsites. You know, there's probably certain applications where microsites would be less of an impact on a neighborhood, but there's been occasions sometimes you hear microsites and then you have the homeowners that's directly in relationship to it. They have their own issues with that. To me, I believe if the foundation of the structure is already going to change going from a 5-inch to an 8-inch pole, and that for some reason the artificial tree component, to my standard, wasn't vetted to a point that we can actually say there's a good reason why we're not doing it. I mean, to me, that is the least impact on the neighborhood, and it's within the jurisdiction of our judgment in the project. So I'm inclined to.
So you'd be inclined to uphold the appeal?
Uphold the appeal.
Okay. Mr. Grisilli?
Well, the gentleman, from AT&T said he's not an engineer, and I appreciate that. I'm not sure if this was ever looked at. I'm sure, like you indicated, that the impact of the dirt and so on, because I used to be in construction, I can understand if it's 3 feet, it's a whole lot different than if it's, 8 inches. I don't know what kind of space is up there, if it's even available, if the space would even be available to do it. I think, like Mr. Lewis said, it wasn't even again, easy for me to say, and certainly AT&T has to pay for this, so certainly it's cheaper to do it the way they've applied as opposed to the other way. But if I was going to come in here and I don't know, it seems like, why wouldn't I at least offer this up saying, well, we could do this for you, but it's going to look at the impact, literally look at the impact. It's going to, again, because we don't know what the impact is because you said we're not sure. It's just a lot more dirt and a lot more space. Why wouldn't you come in with that and say, we could do this, but it's going to be really, really worse. This is a better thing for the neighborhood because it's going to move less dirt and it's going to do all this other stuff. But you didn't do it because you come in, like anybody would, with the cheapest way to do it and the easiest way to do it. And knowing full well that if we if we uphold this appeal tomorrow morning, whatever time court opens, you'll be there and you'll be suing us, because we supposedly caused a problem. But we do have, at least, we're advised, aesthetics is about the only thing we can do. Size, no. Can't do gamma rays or whatever the heck it is. Can't do any of that stuff. But we can do aesthetics. And you didn't give us an option here. You just gave us the cheapest and easiest way to do it. Now, the neighborhood might say, wait a minute, you're going to take up the whole hillside. We don't want that. Never got that opportunity. So I'm very frustrated that, it seems like it's like a closed-end game where you just come in and say, this is what we got, and we're going to win anyway eventually, so just do it our way. So, very disappointed.
So you're inclined to uphold the appeal as well?
I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but I'm just very disappointed.
Mr. Rose?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to just, back up and, I think we all know this, but it's good to repeat it. We, started 50, 60 years ago with the water towers up on hills because that's the gravity was needed. And pretty soon those water towers became, the top where the transmission is going to be best for all of this stuff. And so all the cell stuff started going up there. Of course, where this is going, it's going to change again. I mean, technology is going to be incredible, whether or not it's satellite or fiber in the ground. I mean, it's going to keep changing. But we're here to make a decision for the next 20 years, probably what's going to happen here. People that are up on hills, they have some pluses. They don't have a lot of traffic. They're up in a really quiet area of the city. I live in Flatland where more than 2,000 cars go down my street every day. And it's a nice street. But, so everybody has pros and cons where they live. One of the things that I listened to 3 weeks ago when the appellant, Mr. O, talked a lot about the planning that went on with the city. He talked about, the 5-inch versus the 8-inch, the grading, the trees, and all these things. And even, this evening, I think it came out a lot, is that there is kind of in planning, there's an initial plan, and then when you actually go and do the work, you need a building permit. That's more specific. And yet we need to be flexible enough to know that, hey, now that we're doing it, we found out that this isn't going to work and it's going to have to be changed. And we'll try to make the best decisions as we go along. But when Mr. O talked through all those areas, I know Lisa, our staff person, got up there and went through the 6 items and said, not a problem, not a problem, not a problem, not a problem. And so I didn't see a lot of concerns. I was concerned about noise. I'm satisfied about what the staff report has come up with noise, because humming could drive you crazy. As far as the, what it looks like, if we did nothing, that tree may die. I think, Mr. Grocott brings up a point, though. I think, you do have to take a reasonable look at it, and I think staff should look and say, hey, if there's a, 30%, 40% chance or higher that we could lose this tree, I think a backup plan would be actually nice. We always want to continue to plant more trees. The other trees are growing as I speak here. So let's try to protect where there is risk, where there is something that we've taken away from the neighborhood so that we could have some coverage if we need to do something like that. So
you would be leaning towards denying the appeal?
So I don't see any, I don't see other choices.
Okay.
I, want it in my backyard, they don't want it in their backyard, but that's where we are right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Royce. Let's let Mr. Grocott chime in a bit.
First, I just want Mr. Royce to know that when I'm driving down San Carlos Avenue, I always make a point of going down and then going down your street, so add to the car traffic for you. No. Mr. Royce, I think one of the reasons you're not finding a choice is because one wasn't given to us. I don't think adequate alternatives were given to us from the very beginning on this. And when I asked the question about instead of having 6 antenna on one site in one co-location, adding 2 and so forth, is there another way to break that down and do maybe 6 antennas in 6 different locations? I had no idea the technology that was explained to me even existed, and this other terminology. Again, Mr. Mayor, what's that terminology about the microsites? So I wasn't asking a leading question already knowing the answer. I had no idea, but AT&T kindly explained that to me, and I realized an alternative actually, in this case, had been left out. I think a second alternative that's been left out is the tree alternative. And what I hear from the community, the neighborhood, is we're not saying AT&T don't come into our neighborhood and put something here. They're saying work with us. Show us these things. Talk to us about a tree, what that impact would be, and we'll work with you. We'll give you our leanings, which way we would rather go. And then when it gets to council, we won't see these people sitting here because they will have already talked to AT&T and worked out that's how we do it, our staff knows. That's the way we approach it with remodels and additions, is the first thing you do is you notify the neighbors come and look at your project, and they might say in advance of going to the planning commission, or let's hope it never gets appealed to city council, could you move this window, could you push this back a little bit, and neighbors work it out. I mean, that's the way we do it in San Carlos. That's why we have our process set up the way we do. So I'm leaning towards upholding the...
Before we get started, this isn't a discussion, this is a discussion between council. Oh, no.
I have no more questions.
No, he's making comments.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I'm leaning towards upholding the appeal, and yet I would say that I wouldn't expect AT&T to be found at the courthouse tomorrow. I would expect AT&T to be found at their drawing board, showing the tree on their site plan, number one, and reapply and work with the neighborhood in your reapplication. I think if you do that, you'll end up with a tower. It might take a little bit more time, but you're going to end up with what it is you're looking for, and you'll end up with happy neighbors.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just before you make a comment, and to reiterate, then I believe that we can also, along with the neighborhood, evaluate the impact, the construction impact, the aesthetic impact with the alternatives, especially with the 5-inch to the 8-inch pipe change. So.
Okay. So it sounds like we have 2 who want to uphold the appeal, 1 to deny, and we'll let people chime in after, and then 1 undecided. So this is the fun part. With all full disclosure, I know this area very well. The viewpoint you get right here is 3 houses away from where I grew up. So I grew up in this area. I used to sneak into the water tanks all the time. I was that kid.
I'll ask you what you do.
Didn't do anything. Bob, I counted deer. But I've been going back and forth on cell phone towers. I struggled the last time we sat up here, and I voted in favor of a cell phone tower, mainly because I knew we weren't going to get the 3 votes against it, and I thought it had some of the same issues as this, and I didn't want to leave my council members out to dry. So I'm really heartened to see 2 council members already saying that they would like to uphold the appeal. This really comes down to we are in a community, and for a lot of people, the best thing to happen next door to them is nothing. You don't want anything to be built next door to you, and I understand that, but we live in the real world. In the real world, things are going to get put up next to you. Sometimes you live next to industry, sometimes you live next to a neighbor you don't like. Things happen. But you have to come to the table. You have to be willing to compromise at least a little bit. In our residential design review committee, we would never let a home get built next to another home made out of tin. Absolutely, the home's going to get built, but it's not going to be the cheapest home possible. It's going to be a home that looks good in the community, a home that's respectful of the neighbors and the tradition of that community. So when you bring a proposed antenna that essentially is the cheapest you can do and the ugliest you can do, it doesn't speak to San Carlos. And your project manager himself has said he's not familiar with the site. It makes me feel like you're not really familiar with us as a community. You really should reach out to the neighbors. They've said themselves that they understand at some point a cell phone tower is going to go there. Let's find one that works so we don't have to do this every time. I believe a tree, well, I think it will look the best. You might be able to prove to us it won't. The neighborhood might say, we don't want you digging 30 feet or whatever out of our ground. Go with this, but give us options. If you don't give us options, you're going to be very hard-pressed to find 3 council members who believe that the option you give us is the best. And I think this is very aesthetically unattractive. I think you're putting at risk a heritage tree that neighborhood really does enjoy. One of the reasons people do live in our hills is because they're covered in trees. And you're jeopardizing one of those, which again will be an aesthetic impact. So I believe it's one of the few things we do get away on, but you didn't try to cover this up. You didn't try to make it nicer. You just gave us a cheap proposal and said that's it. So I'm going to be voting tonight to uphold the appeal as well. So it sounds like we have 3 council members so far going. I would love to see it as unanimous. We can really say a statement that if you're going to come in and do business in our community, you need to work with our community, and we can work together, and things will happen. Cell phone towers will go up, but let's do our job and work together. So, Mr. Grisilli?
No, I just wanted to make sure that I spoke to the neighbors also. If it comes back and if AT&T does come back with another proposal for a tree or something like that, it could be worse than what we have. So I want to make sure that everybody understands this is not a process that ends tonight no matter what happens. So be aware of the fact that the 5 of us may go in a certain direction tonight, and 3 or 4 months from now or whenever, it may go exactly the opposite. So I want to make sure that no one feels that, oh, we won or whatever else. This tower, I'm sure somehow, because of the way the Federal Communications Commission is mandated, will go in. It's just a matter of how it's going to go in, and hopefully, as the mayor said, to speak to our community situation in San Carlos. I just want to make sure I made that statement.
Okay. Mr. Royce, would you like to chime in, or you good? Okay. Mr. Wilcott, you got anything else? I'd love to hear a motion.
I would move approval of
well, Mr. Rubens, we'll get you to, yeah, I'm sure the lawyer wants to talk.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion that we uphold the appeal of Mr. O. and...
Okay. What do you need from us, Mr. Rubens? Is that enough?
There's 2 issues I'd just like to clarify some of the statements that have been made by the council in making their decisions. I heard one of the facts I think that you were focusing on was the change in the antenna structure. It turns out that it's not an existing 8-inch pole, but the poles have to be replaced. And in my mind, that makes it more like a new antenna than strictly a co-location antenna, as was initially applied for and proposed. So that kind of changes things a little bit factually in your analysis of the least intrusive feasible location, because if the pole's being replaced, it seems to me that you are the statements that you made, I think, are going to that question. The second is you have a strong concern about the aesthetics of the site with regard to the heritage oak tree that's there, and you're not convinced that the plans that you have before you adequately protect that tree. And then thirdly, process-wise, we don't have formal findings to uphold the appeal in the packet. We have it as an option for you. If you're inclined to move this motion through the way it is, what I'd like to do is bring back a set of formal findings for you to adopt at your next meeting that would be consistent with the statements that you've made tonight and that would become part of the record.
So let me try this, if I may. I would move that we uphold the appeal of Ju O and revoke the decision of the Planning Commission, thereby denying the conditional use permit and architectural review application for a new wireless antenna facility for AT&T at 260 Shelford Avenue, pending, and tell me if that's the right word, pending findings that staff will provide the council at our next meeting.
It wouldn't actually be pending, it's just, well, I guess that's just a different way of saying it, but subject to approval of formal findings of upholding the appeal at our next meeting.
So stated.
Okay, is there a second? I second. Okay, any last discussion? All right, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break while we clear out, and then we're going to let staff queue up all our zoning. So thank you very much. Really smart, I think, to go back. That was the first for our town, so let's see if we can do another first.
I have jury duty tomorrow.
No, it's not.
I have jury duty tomorrow.
Really?
The chair just keeps rolling though.
Don't you have to call? Did you call? Oh, you called. You gotta go. 9:30. They won't want me. In Redwood City? South City. Redwood City.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started again. We all want to take our seats.
Loud.
For Alan.
Yeah.
Call 8:30.
I got up.
I always get off.
All right, Mr. Savay, if you want to kick us off, we're at item 9B, consideration of the zoning ordinance and other amendments to the San Carlos Municipal Code, and there's 3 subchapters, so I'll let you take the show.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. We're at the final milestone of the complete updating of our zoning ordinance, otherwise known as the Zoom In on Zoning project. And this project follows the completion of our general plan, climate action plan, and housing element. And on the screen, you see our agenda schedule for this evening. I'll be giving an overview, a brief overview up front, and then we'll talk about some of the big ideas that we've vetted through the community. And then we'll do some housekeeping and number 2, summary of the council actions, where we'll talk about how this needs to be consistent with our municipal code, and we'll talk about some of the things that were done in your motions at the end. And then we'll be open for questions and answers, of course. In terms of the purpose of the zoning update, the words that you see there, many of them were taken from the general plan, and the general plan has really guided this process. And the zoning ordinance is perhaps the most common city regulation for people in the community. Whether you're remodeling your house or your business, or you're coming into town, you want to start a new business, you come in contact with the zoning ordinance. It's also, it really goes to and regulates the look and feel of our community. How tall are buildings? How far are they set back from the street? How much landscaping is required? And so these are some of the critical issues that I think were covered in our purpose. In terms of the objectives, we knew from discussions during the general plan process that the new zoning ordinance and map would need to strike a balance between our idea to preserve our unique community character, and also that the new zoning ordinance needs to ensure that buildings look right from the street, and that they frame our public spaces, and they create a pedestrian-oriented community. Again, these objectives, as you can see, these were also pulled from the guideposts in the general plan. In terms of the process, it's been about a 14-month process, and we said it was going to be about a 12 to 14-month process. We started in June of 2010 there, and over the last 14 months, we've had numerous meetings with various people and organizations, committees, and commissions in the community. And a number of documents or modules were released at various stages in the process, as you see there. We've had 3 modules, and at each stage, we went back out and held a workshop and talked to the people who were interested, and we got more feedback. So it was a continuous collaborative feedback process, and at each step, we would incorporate the feedback that we got into the document. So the document changed considerably from the beginning to the end. And in terms of I think this has been a real collaborative, community-based process. As you can see, there's been a number of different meetings and workshops over time. And again, at each one of those groups, each one of those voices has made a contribution to this document. Michael Diet and his firm have been helping cities throughout the country update their zoning ordinance update, and so Michael Diet is here this evening, and he's going to take over the presentation from here. So we're going to be sharing this, and then I'm going to come up and talk about a few more things with industrial zoning and transitions, and then we'll move into some housekeeping after that. Michael.
Thank you very much, Al. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, pleasure to see you again. I think it was just a bit over a year since I was last here, and I just want to hit some of the highlights about zoning and how we approach this to really give you a clear, logical approach, something that will be, everyone will be able to use and understand. My son calls me a zoner because I really just love doing this stuff. And what I think is important is that we try to take what you approved as the framework in the general plan and have a clear structure with residential districts, mixed-use districts, commercial and industrial, to simplify and streamline wherever possible and to make this something that really does carry out your intent. To have a very clear map, to bring forward the entitled projects, the planned developments you can see listed over here. So we're not going back and opening up things that already are vested, but we are trying to really have this color legend follow the general plan, the decisions that you've made, and create through purpose statements an expression of legislative intent. You start with the general plan policies, you have a purpose statement, and this guides everyone at the counter because it expresses to applicants and to the community what your expectations are for individual districts or sub-districts. And we've used, as well as I mentioned when I was last here, tables so that you can see and compare how are the industrial districts different, what's the logic underlying the regulation of uses or the presentation of development standards. So we have permitted uses, limited uses subject to some specific standards. You meet those and you can go pull your permit. Or a conditional use permit, as you well know, where it's a discretionary case-by-case review. The development standards go beyond thinking of just the classic where the building is on the site to the three-dimensional form and keying the diagrams we try to make clearly to a set of tables so that everyone knows what the rules are and how they're expressed. We tailored these two conditions in San Carlos. We were always asked, are you just giving us generic or boilerplate? It's not. We tried to develop ownership of the drawings with an understanding of what you have had built, what people liked and didn't like, and had boxes of plans and would have a lot of advice in our workshops, and tried to make those standards the ones that are most meaningful and effective. So we actually worked out drawings for these different physical types of development, the single unit, the multi-unit, the small lot, single unit, some of the bungalow courts or townhouses, thinking about how these actually are being built in the city today, and allowing, as well as the general plan said, for the smaller lot, single-family fee ownership project, which is a little more affordable and makes some sense, but have some standards that are keyed to what happens when you reduce the lot size, but it would still have to go through a whole discretionary review process. We put in ideas from the general plan about corner stores, how they would make sense, where they would have to be, what some of the limitations are. You want them to be small, 1,500 square feet, be open during the day on corner lots, be away from downtown so they're not competing with what you're trying to do in the downtown area, and really allow for additional findings of neighborhood character so they really make sense. We were very concerned as well and got a lot of community comment on the transitional standards, the need to really think about how single family works with multifamily, with upper story setbacks and step backs and landscaping, as well as in some of the other areas. And think too about the pedestrian and transit-oriented development. What's the right framework? How do you express expectations for the designers so that they're building entries oriented to the street, that you can see into the buildings? There's some sense of engagement with the parking on the side or the rear. And you do that through build two lines, what we call transparency provisions. Those are windows and glass doors, and some of the public improvement and design requirements. We want really a street wall where you have a sense of closure, and it builds on the character, the historic character that you've got on Laurel and San Carlos. You want the standards to reflect the building's that people say are great, like the Drake Building or the canopy just walking along Laurel. And let's have in these districts some standards for outdoor living area, the balconies or the patios that really are so great when you live in the kind of environment we do in the Bay Area. And as well, we would set out standards for building entries and step backs and minimum amounts of landscaping. So a lot of these are performance oriented. And the architects who spoke to the workshop they said, tell us what you want us to design to and give us that flexibility to then come up with something that meets our clients' needs and our understanding of the market. In the East San Carlos area, we looked at a lot of transition questions, and we got some advice and had a lot of good community input. I think after the commission took the draft they had back, there was a lot of fine-tuning, so you'll see additional refinements on height and setbacks, site regulations, so you don't have that light and glare, the performance requirements, so don't have the kind of noise, vibration issues that you'd have heard about in other applications. And it's all about being a good neighbor. It's really trying to get any new development to be respectful of existing conditions. In the San Carlos area, we had a general plan diagram that had a mixed-use designation on East San Carlos, translated that to the mixed-use, neighborhood mixed-use zoning classification. And we developed these transition requirements, started at the lower area here with this upper story setbacks. We got community input, so we reduced this. The commission said, let's drop it down to 30 feet or go up a little if you have a peaked roof, have a landscape buffer, and pull it back 30 feet. So I think a lot of that fine-tuning, that response to the concerns that we heard expressed is now in the document that you have before you as a draft. So that's where I'd mentioned these ideas of the height maximums, the setbacks, 2 stories mixed use, 3 stories with residential, which is, be a very acceptable 3rd story. And the floor-to-floor heights aren't the same as commercial. So the existing zoning provides for that quite large envelope, and you can see how the new ordinance really cuts back the idea. We worked closely with the Economic Development Advisory Committee and the stakeholders wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be over-regulating. And in the commercial industrial areas, this translates to allowing flexibility in uses, thinking back to those use tables, and have straightforward development standards and flexible standards that think about the relationship to the street, but allow for a lot of flexibility in the tenant improvements and tenant use mixes. So you're seeing additional standards that would be for improvements, building orientation, the articulation, so not flat blank walls. That's not acceptable in San Carlos. The parking, as I mentioned before, the side or the rear have high quality building materials and have those views into the buildings in that pedestrian zone. And have the commercial centers have a mix of uses, some retail base, a good strong base that we want them to get the entry plazas, meet some integrated design themes, but we're trying to let the architects working with their commercial developers and tenants come forward with the best ideas for you. So you'll see more of a performance approach on design criteria than trying to dictate specific types of architecture or materials and finishes, which I don't think is the right message. I'd now invite Al back for a briefing on industrial, and then I'll wrap up.
Thank you, Michael. And in the industrial zones, the map that you see on the right there represents our, many of these zones are the same as they have been historically. For instance, this light blue area represents the light industrial district or the Harbor Industrial Association area. And this IH has traditionally been heavy industrial in these areas. This GCI area, that's a new, but that's a commercial zone. But there's a couple of areas that are different from the way that we've seen them historically. And what is being suggested is a couple of zones that are unique. Again, this industrial arts zone, this kind of light blue here. And what you see here is a road system that's fine grain road. There's a lot of small parcels in there. If you go there, you'll see small businesses on small lots paying lower rents, but they have some of the most unique service, retail service uses in our community. You'll see iron workers, tile, people in tile, people selling doors. You can do electric. If you want to get your house or your business remodeled, you could do it all in this neighborhood. So it provides a very unique opportunity to continue this. In contrast with the industrial professional zone up here in this dark blue area, what we're seeing there is a completely different lot pattern. This is about an 18-acre parcel. And so the idea up in this area is you have a synergy with some of the businesses that are in existence. You have R&D. We know that PAMP is going to be under construction soon. And so the idea here is to bring jobs into the community and encourage and incentivize some of those jobs to come into our community. So in terms of the industrial arts, again, promoting that small-scale industrial artisan-type business to remain in our community. If a developer came in, for instance, and bought out that whole neighborhood, it's about the same size as that PG&E site, and you'd wipe out that unique asset in our community. So it's to preserve the existing development pattern and really celebrate the types of uses that we have. In the industrial professional district, again, it's to promote job growth and incentivize the businesses that you want to come into your community. What we heard from our Economic Development Advisory Commission is that they're suggesting that we try and attract green tech and biotech uses and offices and product production. And you do that by ensuring some certainty in the marketplace with your development standards. And as Michael noted, some of the East Side neighborhood protections, he talked about the multifamily protections along the East San Carlos, but these were also built into the industrial areas. And there was a couple of areas that I think garnered the most in-depth discussion at the Planning Commission level, and even at EDAC and from our community. And these were the areas along Taylor Way between Northwood, and this is that light industrial area, and that's the Harbor Industrial Association area. And you see these lots are big. These are 300 or more feet deep, 100 or more feet wide. They're very large lots, and we're talking about this transition here, which is different than another transition we'll look at in just a moment. But as part of this, the existing zoning, for instance, just to go back historically, is this box here, this orange box. And when the Planning Commission and when the staff started to grapple with these transition issues, and staff came forward with about a 20-foot setback and a stepping back of the height. When the Planning Commission, after a thorough review by the Planning Commission on 2 occasions, they moved the setback to 30 feet at the rear, and this green area represents a 10-foot landscape buffer. And this landscape buffer would be around the entire industrial or even the mixed-use residential areas. So what they said is step it back at least 30 feet and then step it up in height. For instance, if you're 30 feet away, you can go to 30 feet high. If you're 40 feet away, you can go 40 and 50. Historically, the zoning has allowed for buildings to go to 75 feet as a permitted use in this area, in this zone. The last time the Planning Commission, the second time that the Planning Commission considered this, they again grappled with this issue, and they added a conditional use permit for development that would go over 50 feet. So anything from 50 to 75 is not permitted anymore. You need to go through a discretionary process. And just to go back really quick, one of the things that we've heard from GSC residents is that they're interested in a 35-foot height limitation, and that's represented by number 2, this line that's located here. And so this is something that was also considered. The other transition area that was discussed in depth was this area between Hall and Terminal Way. Now, the difference here is that these lots are much smaller lots. They're only 100 feet deep and maybe 50 feet wide or 100 feet wide. And so they're much smaller than the ones we saw on the other side, and it's a different zoning category. It's heavy industrial. So we're talking now about this transition area, and as you can see, the lot depth is a whole lot different. This perspective is this street right here, along Terminal Way between Hall and Terminal. It's these buildings right here. So we're looking at the corner of these buildings. In the current configuration, those buildings are pushed all the way back to the rear property line. And you can see the homes here. They're about 20 feet high. In the configuration that is being proposed by the Planning Commission, it would be flipped around so that these buildings would be pushed away 30 feet and all the buildings would need to be up toward the front. So this would pretty much be flipped, and then the height would grow up toward the front of the property. So this is what is being proposed by the Planning Commission. It's this, again, a 30 feet setback and a transitional height, 30 feet back, 30 feet high, 40, and so on, up to 50, a maximum of 50, with a 10-foot landscaping buffer. And one of the things that, curiously, we started to look at is okay, so you can get a certain amount of floor area on your lot in this zone. In this zone, it's a 2.0 floor area ratio, meaning if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you could do twice that, 20,000 square feet. What we found under this configuration is that you couldn't actually get all the square footage that you, per the zone, but you could get about a 1.6 FAR and 15 or 16,000 square feet. So the Planning Commission, in looking at the economics and the neighborhood protections, felt that this was a good balance between what the neighborhood was suggesting, which was 35 feet, and the economics of the property. And as you can see under the GFC, it again was talking about a 35-foot setback or height with a 30-foot setback, and you would bring it down to about a 1.2. So that was part of the discussion.
Balance of the district's public and semi-public airport plan development carry out the other policies in the general plan, and they really apply to the areas where you'd expect to apply them. In the plan development district, we've added a nuance to welcome plan development for smaller projects in downtown on a half-acre, but in the other districts, you really want to have a 2-acre or more project, because what you're getting with the plan development is the ability to have some relief from the base district standards. You want that fine-grained solution in the downtown, but in the other districts, let's have them plan for a larger area to get that additional flexibility, the 2 acres or more. And in the residential plan developments, of course, the general plan intensity limits would apply. So it's not allowing for some backdoor exception. And all the other standards could then be set, as you do now in the planned communities, through the plan districts. We map the gateway overlay districts as you've established them in the general plan for the primary gateways and the secondary gateways. We've got the hillside district, which is a slope density formula, so there's this slopes are greater, there's a density reduction factor built in, and have the other standards. So it's just a fine-tuning of what is really best practices for the hillsides. The neighborhood hub was another concept that works in tandem with the corner store I'd mentioned earlier, and this could apply to the residential areas that are away from the downtown mixed-use areas, and it would be a discretionary overlay. It's set up as a floating district, and we have a set of rules for it, but it's not mapped until someone comes forward with a neighborhood hub concept, and you'd have specific criteria, you'd limit it to neighborhood serving uses, and have to have findings in order to apply that to the map. The third part of the ordinance combines the regulations that apply in some or all districts, so they're now all put together in one place, and they largely carry forward a lot of things you've already acted on in terms of the housing programs. and signs. And we do spent some time on trying to provide some clarity on some of these specific citywide regulations, the projections, the screening, the swimming pools and the like, so that everyone understands. For example, the accessory structures in the back half of the lot, not in the front setback area, and adding some additional flexibility that was needed in some of these to make sure that the fences in the front and the street side yards are lower, which is important for driveway visibility and intersection safety. And the director could approve some increase, in a special situation up in the hills upon certain findings. And we have a very clear table here. For example, if you want to go above the height limit, you can only do it for certain features, the skylights, the solar equipment, some of the mechanical equipment, and there's a limitation on how much of the roof area you can have and where it has to be. So by putting these things all down on a table, not buried in, and no disrespect to the city attorney, but not buried in a lot of long paragraphs, everyone can say, they can see, I understand exactly what the rules are. We do want to have, as part of good lighting practices, no glare, so we have full cutoff fixtures where the light really has to be below the 90-degree plane, and we've got some height limits on the new lighting fixtures. We also have rules about projections into the yards, again, codifying largely what you have, but making it clearer, and allowing as well for the Americans for Disabilities Act, so you can say what are the reasonable accommodations you need to put in place. So these rules and criteria are all laid out, as are rules for screening and swimming pools, trash collection, and the undergrounding. Let's make sure we don't see the new utilities, that they're put underground, and we maintain, as I mentioned earlier, that visibility requirements for public safety at the intersections. Landscaping picks up some of the new state legislation on model codes with the water conservation, drought-tolerant emphasis, and implements the climate action plan as well as the general plan policies. And we set forward some design principles. What is it that you really expect of good landscape designs in San Carlos? But allow as well for a landscape architect to say, hey, I've got a different idea. You can then say yes to that if it's a superior solution. We tell people what their design, what their planting area requirements are, and we have established a set of buffer types. So you have a narrower buffer yard, a little less planting between uses that might not be that incompatible. And when you have the greater incompatibilities, as Al mentioned, industrial and residential, then you have a larger, we call it a type 2 buffer yard. And these ideas have really worked well around the country because they're trying to say, what do we mean when we want adequate screening or buffering? Well, you can look at that and see what the tree and shrub requirements actually are. Build that in up front, put it in your cost pro formas, and there isn't going to be then a debate when it comes forward for final design review. So we have trees, we bring forward and keep the heritage tree provisions, we do some refinement of the language for that and for the water efficient landscaping. One thing that you always need to keep in mind when you write a zoning ordinance is not to create more nonconformities. So you think about that we don't do something that inadvertently makes a use or a structure nonconforming. And we want to distinguish those nonconformities that are truly health and safety issues from uses or structures that you might have inherited when you annex some land, but it's certainly something that everyone can live with. So we have beefed up these provisions and introduced some more flexibility that I think makes sense, makes good economic sense. We've got spent a lot of time on making the parking numbers work to have some flexibility in the mixed-use areas, to support reuse and change in the industrial arts areas, and to just say, let's not spend money unnecessarily on parking vehicles. So there's some savings in parking cost requirements. And a recognition where you've got good transit service that you can have lower parking requirements. A lot of people like these ideas, and I think they make good sense. We also put in the concept of unbundling the parking so that a homeowner is aware that the parking costs separate from the housing costs, and they might not want to buy the 2 spaces, they buy only 1. The commission was concerned that this not just be something that is administered by staff as of right, so we do have a CUP requirement on this, and we allow for a range of parking reductions if people can give you the evidence that you want. We allow people to pay a fee if you create an off-street parking district and not have to put any on-site parking on, and recognize and create in the ordinance itself the parking standards for bicycles and for the landscaping, screening, and good, just basically good parking lot and structure layout. We have a whole section devoted to the special uses. These are the problems that you often have. And again, looking back over the case-by-case approvals, the conditions of approval, if you're always saying that there's certain limitations on drive-through or large format or outdoor dining, why don't you just draw those, put them right in the code so that people know instead of having to be surprised at a hearing about additional requirement? We put those all in the ordinance, and I just highlight a few here. Personal services, the standards for tattoo parlors, for example, or the single-room occupancy group housing facility. For transportation demand management, we write up a set of rules that are similar to what the COG is doing and what the general plan expected. This is a good menu-based approach to get trip generation down. If someone has an operating transportation demand management program, we set one of these up in South San Francisco about 8 years ago, have done one in Emeryville. They work well if they're menu-based approached and people sense there's some flexibility to implement them. And these are the kinds of criteria you apply it to the larger projects, the non-residential development of more than 10,000 feet, and you have a set of procedures and rules that people can apply so they know what kinds of credits they get and what the mix and match might then be. The last big section in the ordinance are a set of rules and procedures for administering the ordinance. We consolidate many of these things into a set of common procedures with best practices. I just want to highlight a few things. We want everyone to know who's in charge of what, and you have a job, as the Planning Commission does and the staff, what the review authorities are for decision-making and for appeals. It's just a quick checklist so anyone knows how to approach each permit. They can see where the rules are and how they're applied. And the idea of having one set of procedures for all of these discretionary permits means you're not repeating them in different sections, and you know what the process is, and it's uniform. This will save staff time, and it will make it much easier for the applicants. We have some new provisions suggesting people could come in for a pre-application review. What does that mean? What can they get out of it? The idea of ex parte communications, you really, in the context of the Brown Act, want things to be in the public forum, and built in, integrated into the code, the environmental review process. We have a tiering for design review, so the director can take up the small projects. The residential design review continues the job it had been assigned already, and the commission takes up everything else if they're already looking at the project. So there's an expansion of the design review to mixed use and commercial development, again, for the larger scale. Waivers are to allow for that flexibility. You heard earlier, sometimes they may need a few inches, a foot or less of a change. Well, let's allow that to be done with a set of rules and limits, consistency with the ordinance and the general plan, and if it's a reasonable accommodation, they have to have findings that this is the least intrusive solution. I'd mentioned the plan development earlier. We also put in place a set of rules for you to enter into and administer and monitor development agreements as they're set forward in the development code. Annexation and pre-zoning, we added some policies and requirements from the general plan into it, and have enforcement provisions, because everyone wants to know, okay, you've done this, how are we going to make sure it's carried out? Well, one new idea is to let code enforcement write tickets by identifying what are the infractions that can then be administered that way. It's a very effective implementation tool. So I know it was kind of a whirlwind tour, but delighted to take any questions if you have any for me.
Okay. Mr. Grocott, you got anything?
Yeah, I've got questions. I think what I'll do, if it's all right, Mr. Mayor, is, I've got like about 10 things, maybe ask 2 or 3 and then move on and come back, go around.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, just to clarify too, there is the house cleaning presentation. We can leave that to when the council's ready to take actions, or we can do it now. I could try and work through those slides fairly quickly.
You do it quickly. Let's get the presentation out of the way, and then we'll go to questions. Okay, Mr. Grocott?
Yes.
Okay.
And as I noted, this is a summary of the city council actions. So we needed to be consistent with the municipal code, the general plan, and it's also interesting to note that this implements many of the general plan policies and actions and several climate action plan measures. Part of it is to make some changes, modifications for multifamily residential on the general plan map, and those are to acknowledge those corrections. So the recommendation is that you acknowledge those corrections in the general plan map for a couple of parcels that didn't get in the original map. The zoning ordinance document that is presented for you for your consideration, the August 2011 document, has some amendments, and there's an errata that is contained in your binder there. It's errata attachment 1. And that errata, a lot of that is a result of the second Planning Commission meeting that occurred on October 3rd as a result of Economic Development Advisory Commission recommendations and edits. Amendments and errata, again, as I noted, they're attached to your report, and there are 3 types. One is for uses, one is for use permits in land use regulations and tables for mixed districts, commercial districts, and industrial districts. And many of the changes that were made at that October meeting that I mentioned were for neighborhood protection. The second are changes for neighborhood protection in the area of increased setbacks, reduced heights, and such. And the third are changes for internal consistency with the municipal code. The section of the zoning ordinance to be changed and the purpose are represented on these slides that I've showed you, this slide and the last one. And they're also described in that errata document. And the zoning ordinance map is amended to be consistent also with the changes that I noted earlier in the general plan map. And that was those 2 parcels that I mentioned. I remove a couple of notations. There were 6 titles of the municipal code. As I noted, there needs to be consistency with the municipal code and the zoning ordinance. There are 6 titles that are recommended for amendment through additional chapters. Amendments to Title 8 are for consistency with the zoning ordinance, to add a new chapter, which is the new location of adult business ordinance. So we moved it out of the zoning ordinance into the municipal code. Title 9 for noise is amended to recognize neighborhoods have quieter ambient noise levels than existing some standards. And Title 12 amendments are made to the existing tree ordinance to change, and also to change the sidewalk cafe process, and to add for outdoor retail sales in the downtown. Title 13 is a new chapter, and it's added for outside sewer service connections. And amendments are also made to reflect the stormwater management chapter. Title 15 is repealed, as it will be replaced by the landscaping ordinance that was discussed earlier. And Title 17 updates are made to reflect the Subdivision Map Act. The city has an existing annexation and sewer connection policy for properties outside the city limits, and the annexation policy is now codified in the zoning ordinance. CEQA determination, this project is exempt from CEQA under the California Environmental Quality Act general rule. That's why we don't have an environmental document for your consideration. It's exempt. And these are your motions. We have these for when you're ready to get to this stage. These are the recommendations of the Planning Commission, is that you approve the document and all the changes. And so we have the two motions here for your consideration later on, and we can bring these back up when you're ready. And we're available to answer any questions or open it up to public. Thank you.
We're going to do questions first. Mr. Grocott? And we'll do two at a time.
Okay.
And then we can move it around.
So I wanted to ask about the putting together of lots, because one of the things I see happening in San Carlos now, it's very popular, and I imagine it's because of our current zoning, is what's affectionately known as the sideway buildings. Where you have got this building base, you park underneath in the building base, and then you have this cantilever that hangs out so you can get more upstairs. And typically those go in on 60 by 120 lots, and there's quite a few of them that have happened here around City Hall. I don't know, in my opinion, they're kind of unsightly. And at one time we had we had the anti-sandwiching ordinance, and then we also, it seemed to me, we had things in our ordinance that maybe weren't effective, where we were trying to bring properties together and get developers to, and the anti-sandwiching thing was part of that. So, getting a little long here, but so my question is, how does this new zoning address that? Are we doing anything where we are trying to get, again, the properties together so that we can get more interesting developments, maybe some courtyard developments? I think one of the projects that we liked as a council recently was over here on the cul-de-sac street up the way, where he was putting in some houses, some single-family residential, but it was on a courtyard. He was really building on the courtyard theme, and we all liked that project a lot. So that's what I'm looking for here, and
Yeah, I think I understand what your question is. I don't think there's anything necessarily in the code that would encourage assembly, and it's more of a marketplace issue. And what we've seen is that if you have a smaller lot, you can't make the economics work unless you get enough residential units to make it work, to make the economics pan out. So the bigger the lot is, the more lots you can assemble, the more units you can get, and the more things make sense. The more setbacks work, the more parking works. So the small lots are really hard to get that parking on. And so that's when you see assembly occur. If you can get more lots, then it makes, buying that extra lot, the economics, make more sense. And again, the design, the setbacks, the heights and things are easier to do. So a lot of the things that I've seen them too. I'm very familiar with the units that you're talking about, with the park under stuff where you have a cantilever. And I mean, I think what we've built in here is on some of those, instead of seeing an L-shaped building on the front, what we're looking for is a rectangular shaped building on the front. And I think that has been, we did think about that when we designed this, some of these design guidelines for residential and mixed-use development.
So, in other words, what I'm hearing you say is that at least the street appearance would get away from this L shape, this Oklahoma stuck in the ground look, if you will.
I believe that we did consider that. Okay. Since that's sort of, it's a huge document, But that is my recollection. And yeah, and we did do that because I had the same consideration or concern with regard to that odd L shape that you get.
Right.
And you see the cars too.
Yeah,
parked in
that's
there.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Then I'll ask one more question, and then we can move on. I noticed right at the end you had mentioned the waivers on lot coverage, and going through the document as quickly as I did, trying to get a good overview, I had noticed that, and yet I know for years, the only hard fixed number we've ever had in San Carlos is lot coverage. People are sometimes surprised to find out that, we're really pretty flexible on square footage in terms of, square footage of the living area, but we've always been very hard on that 40%. So can you take us through the thinking on that one figure that we're going to change our history and everything we've done for all these years?
Well, it's the ordinance includes a number of new standards that you saw that are trying to look at the three-dimensionality and the relation to the street.
Right.
So the flexibility that in terms of varying that lot coverage standard is subject to that 10% limit. So it's not throwing it out. It's just saying that when you add in a floor area ratio, heights, step backs, you may have an odd-shaped lot or a specific design solution, and there's a whole set of procedures and findings that the director has to give, which is on page 296. So it's not really a blank check. It's saying that we want to work with your architect and site planner, and if you need up to a 10% variation, instead of taking it through the whole review process, show us why you need that minor flexibility, and we've got a new process to do it. So the idea was not to throw away your history, but to give that ability to grant those kind of very site-specific adjustments.
Okay, without having to then for the applicant to go through a variance process, which
That's
is
correct. And so it's really saying the idea is when you introduce some of these new performance and design requirements, and they don't strictly meet the hardship findings required for variances, you do want to offer some flexibility, some wiggle room. And it's just been good practice to say, we're telling you what the standards are, but we have a way to work with you on fine-tuning the design. And that's why you can also establish conditions of approval, the director can, to make sure that if there was, let's say, a reduction in the lot coverage, get some more landscaping.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rose? Yeah, I have about 7 items. There's only one towards the very end that I feel strongly about. We'll go through that later. But the first 2, let me just put out. I see under the construction time, we changed from 7 a.m. start time to 8 a.m. I've worked in construction. I know that when it's going to be 95 degrees that day and you're going to do the pour, getting that cement truck out early at 6, 7 a.m., you're paying for the pumping. Very expensive process for the day. And so 8 a.m. just seems, why are we changing it? Were there complaints? I know that in Planning Commission, we would get complaints for someone didn't want people to work on the weekends. We said, well, you don't work on the weekends, it's going to go from 4 months to 5 months. It's still going to take as much time. Someone running a tile saw anytime during the day is probably terrible. But to get back, I guess, Al, here in kind of the building thing, why the change? Wasn't 7 a.m. working? I'm really interested in the contractor, the working soul who shows up and works all day. Why we're delaying them to 8?
Is there a page number that you have on that?
Yeah, this is, I'll have Exhibit B, page 3, on the...
He's in the binder.
On the zooming, the November 14th.
What exhibit was that? Tab.
So it's,
Tab 4.
it's not paged very well. It's early on. It says Exhibit
Tab
B,
4.
page 3.
Or building and construction, yeah.
And it's labeled construction activity in the middle of the page.
Okay. Health and safety.
Tab.
Public peace and welfare.
Yeah.
Should be under 9.
Tell you what, let us have just a couple of seconds to look over that. I mean, I can give you a general reaction to that. It's exactly as you noted. I mean, it's in terms of complaints, but you're right. I mean, you know, it's trying to strike a balance between getting the work done over a shorter period of time or stretching it out over a longer period of time. And we have had complaints about noise early in the morning in neighborhoods, and I think that it could have been, again, looking for the language, it could have been that it...
I'm interested in any other processes where we try to have the contractor use best practices or be reasonable, you know?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they could show up at 7 and, you know, you don't frame a house at 7 a.m. in the morning, but there's a lot of other things that you could do and save the framing for 10 a.m. Things like that. Yeah.
No, well, this is really.
What do other cities do?
For the actual schools that are subject to the rules, but I really do defer to Al, because
exempt activity. The following noise actually are exempt from the provisions of this chapter. Construction activities. So what it's saying is actually that the construction activities in these hours are exempt from the health and safety chapter. So it's on that page in 9.30.070, it talks about the following noise generating activities are exempt from the provisions. Yeah.
So, Councilmember, someone could start construction at 7. Between 7 and 8, they shouldn't have noise that exceeds the limits.
Okay.
After 8 o'clock, they're exempt. So I think the idea is, speaking for staff, was that be a good neighbor, be a good workman between 7 and 8.
So maybe we should say 7 there as the start time. Unless there's a
That's
reason
fine.
to change.
That's
fine.
acceptable if
That's fine to go
Okay.
back to 7.
And my second question is just
It's an idea that.
Just write it in pencil for the moment.
Staff doesn't.
Yeah, we're gonna.
I think it's a reasonable change for you to consider as you deliberate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Changed it for a reason, so we'd like to know why you changed it, and since we can't seem to get that answer, some of us may not support the change back, so to speak.
Okay, Ms. Royce, you got another one?
And can I just go through the second one? The following page talks about solid waste pickup and the time. And I don't know, when I was mayor, I probably got more calls on that where people were wondering why their garbage was picked up early. So it says it's based on the franchise agreement. So what are the earliest times that we pick up in San Carlos?
The way the franchise, well, there's two things about the franchise agreement. First of all, when we negotiated the new agreement with Recology, we did give the council the flexibility to change the times in your ordinance, so you do have that ability. But right now, the way it works is in commercial zones, the pickups start at 4:30 a.m., and in residential areas, start at 6 a.m.
6 is the earliest in residential.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, when we have had complaints about pickup times, both during Allied Waste and more recently during Recology, they basically fall into two areas. One is in areas where residential and commercial, there's a transition, very much like the transitions you talked about early. There's complaints about the 4:30 a.m. start times. And so one scenario might be, rather than wholesale changing all commercial start times, you might consider changing the times in those what I would call transition areas. The other is, from time to time, we do have complaints about pickups starting as early as 6. Some people would prefer 7 and 8 in the residential areas. The trade-off there obviously, is if you start the residential pickups later, then the end time is later, and the complaints we get on the other side is if, I find that if the pickups aren't done by 2 or 3 p.m. in residential areas, people start calling and assume that the pickup has been missed for that day. So obviously, there's a trade-off here. If you start residential earlier, they're done earlier in the day. If you start them later, they may not be done by the time, dinner time rolls around.
But you could have a hangover overlay district. They could, never mind, sorry. A little mirth and banter there for you, Mayor.
So, Andy, if you want to go back to the, I don't know how you want
Yeah, we're gonna do 2 for each. We're just doing questions, so we'll come back to your suggested changes. Mr. Grisilli, do you have any questions? No. Mr. Lewis, do you have any questions?
Yeah, a couple of quick ones. As far as the non-conforming standard, on the 4-foot fences that you brought up tonight, on an intersection, is it a residential intersection? Isn't it currently, after a certain setback, it can go to 6 feet? I guess what I was worried.
Yes, the 4-foot would be if it's on the street property line.
All right, so are we increasing, are we upping a non-conforming standard for houses that currently have 6-foot fences on every corner in San Carlos? And you guys can think about that. I mean, I didn't catch it when I was reading through everything, but when you mentioned it tonight, it felt to me like it was going to be a big change for the future on a corner lot house.
Because I don't think, the director had the flexibility to approve the 6-foot fence.
No, I understood that part, but I believe that right now, we have a lot of homes at a certain setback point, it's like 10 or 15 feet, that the fence can go up to 6 feet. And I believe that's on most residential corners in San Carlos take advantage of that because that's their primary backyard, which is effectively a side yard. So I just want to be sure, from my standpoint, we're not saying that current 6-foot fences, when they're rebuilt or when the house is resold, have to reconform to a 4-foot standard, because I don't think that's a nice privacy for a backyard, side yard. So again, it was as it was presented tonight, it was a cause for concern. Maybe I misunderstood it. So maybe you guys, staff, can take a look at that while we continue to take comments. Stuff is fine with me. I just want to check that out.
Do you have another question, Mr. Lewis?
I do have another one, and that is, if we wanted to add, I looked at the sidewalk cleaning for the new outdoor restaurant provisions. I'm really glad that we're allowing them, but I think the language here is that the owner shall maintain the sidewalk in a clean and safe condition for pedestrian travel. And I think that, could we discuss adding a yearly power washing of the area that is used by a restaurant? In other words, just sort of a standard cleaning. To me, I think the language could be a little bit stronger, because what I worry about is we go off into the city sidewalks, with restaurants, things are going to be spilled over time, and it might be worth putting in a requirement of a yearly power washing or something like that, because we're extending that would something like that be, if council decided that was a good idea, is that something we could consider tonight?
Well, it's in the public right-of-way, so it's a little different. And also, I guess the question would it be then for just the individual's property in front of their business? The city has been looking at increasing the level of power washing and washing in downtown streets more than it is now. And we're starting to look at the costs of that and the frequency of that, and we've already started to make increases to the washing in the downtown. So that would be the question is, are you asking the individual restaurateur or retailer to power wash in front of their business in exchange for a sidewalk cafe permit or something like that?
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking, is if we extend the ability to go on the public right-of-way, that we could add a yearly power washing condition so it maintains a clean standard. I mean, as much as I love Hot Harvest Nights, it takes its wear and tear and cleanliness on the road. And I think it's great that we increase it, but I think that, the council needs to also consider relative costs that we all have to sort of take on. In a case like that, I think it may be worth the individual business that's allowed to use it to say, well, we'll clean it because we're going to allow you to use it.
Yes, that is certainly possible.
It's in the D compliance section, 12-10, 36-050 under conditions.
Yes.
Okay, we can talk about that later. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Grocott.
Okay, I had a question about signage, because we've had some history, especially recently, and so I saw a lot of things about, especially with the east side, relative to building heights and this transition thing that you talked about. But can you speak to the issue of signage? And I'm not talking
We
about...
actually didn't, there are no changes made. We didn't update the sign regulations, so...
Oh, we didn't?
We didn't take that on, so we don't have any recommendations.
The sign ordinance was updated earlier, a year or so ago, as the city was facing some litigation for another issue.
Right. So I understand the answer. I'm just curious when we might, and I understand too that we just looked at it recently, but then, you know, we've just had some recent history, and I think it is an issue, so we may want to take it up again sometime soon. I was expecting it to be part of this, but I guess it's not. So you can tell how I was looking at this by my next question, because what I'm doing here is looking at problems I've seen us deal with, and I have to give you credit. A lot of this stuff, I'm thinking, man, if there's certain developments that if they had happened after this was approved, we'd be much happier. So I like what I see here, and I like also the flexibility. Yeah, I don't have to say the address. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. Alley. We gave up our alley for a particular project, and I think looking back on it, it was a mistake. So I'm curious what we've got in this new zoning that might prevent us from making that same mistake. I think I know the answer because I heard things about addressing the general plan and walkability and so forth. Is that...
Yeah, the general plan does talk about preserving the alleys, but it doesn't say that they can't be considered for change or elimination with a development project. And so there's a recognition that the council or the planning commission or developers you may want the flexibility if a very special project comes along that just won't work, or is a much better project if you get into that situation again. And so it wasn't written out of the zoning ordinance. It left in the possibility, again, to give flexibility.
And to add on to that, in the general plan, it does state that we do value, you're talking about Cowgill Alley, obviously.
Yeah.
And we did talk about that a lot in the general plan committee, and we didn't want to say you can't take it, but we wanted to make sure that the city valued it and that it was going to become, it would be an issue of a development where it's not something that just automatically happens. You have to do something that would benefit the community, since you would be taking away a community benefit. So we wanted to make sure that was available.
So I want to make sure I'm hearing this right. And again, when I was going through this and reviewing it, I thought what I was seeing is that the concept of the alley, and it's not just the alley. I mean, we had the Postman's Path. Yeah. There's even over here on, I think it's between Walnut and Elm, but back on the other side of Holly, there's a staircase that goes up between some houses, and there's areas like that are really nice, and so I was hoping that what I was reading in the zoning change values those kinds of, creating those kinds of pedestrian experiences, and that, yeah, maybe we lose part of the alley for a very special development, but on the other hand, we gain some other pedestrian experiences elsewhere. Am I reading that right here?
Yeah, I think you are. And again, I think what the zoning ordinance tried to do is just say, if you have, for instance, a planned community development where there's more flexibility in the zoning because you want a certain type of development, that you could still consider the elimination, but you could also, there's trade-offs there. I mean, maybe you move the alley somewhere else, or make a new pedestrian path or connection somewhere else and make that developer do that. So I guess the idea was not to take that flexibility away from the city, but recognize that the general plan says it's important to retain those, but again, still add for that design flexibility.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Royce? Oh, so before, I'm making a list, so the sign thing, we're fine with because we already have the sign ordinance, and then are you asking, I'm trying to make a list of what everyone's proposing, so we'll go down that for discussion. Do you want me to add anything?
Just on, I guess just on the sign thing, that staff would take note that,
Okay.
I think that's something we need to look at.
Okay.
In the near future. Maybe it could come out at our retreat or, something like that.
Great. Mr. Royce?
Yeah, so first, very quickly, I just totally agree with Mr. Grocott, this LU 2.8, maintain all alleys for public use, and then it goes in, and again, I agree with Al, let's leave some flexibility, but if I had my way, I would just say retain all alleys, because they're a tremendous value to our circulation of pedestrian and cars throughout our downtown, and we took one of those away. It was a mistake. Okay, so two other real quick items on this. In fact, Mr. Lewis brought up the.
So excuse me, Mr. Mayor, through the chair, Mr. Royce, you want us to discuss that when we get to discussion?
I'm happy leaving it as is with the
Okay.
flexibility. I just
All right.
wanted to emphasize to public and to council that let's keep our alleys.
Right, all right.
On the outdoor dining, and this is not part of the scope of what we're approving, but it says we charge an annual fee, Al. Didn't we, when we started charging for those outside seating, it was a one-time thing? Or did we change it in the fee structure? Where are we with that?
Yeah, it's an encroachment permit, and it's a one-time fee.
One time?
Yeah.
Why does it say annual here?
I'll take a look at that, and I do have a slide with fees on it that I could go to with our current fees.
Check that out, because I thought it was a one-time fee.
Yeah, I can bring that up.
And then the other part of that is a 6-foot handicap access would be maintained. When you get over by our downtown park and you have the umbrellas and you have the table, the line of sight is that brick running down the middle where you have to stay within. Can we live up to this standard of leaving an additional 6 feet from the brick when you have trees?
Yeah, that's a requirement. Now, again, what I'd like to do, what I could do is show some pictures of how it works. I'm prepared to, if the council would like to get into more details about the downtown dining and retail provisions, I do have some illustrations to show the costs and also how that works, but it does work.
Okay. And if I could finish up with my second to last one would be, Al and I already talked about, there's an item there about shading in our parking structures. And it's clarified, those are trees, not artificial. So we're going to get.
Cell phone towers, huh?
Yeah, well, whatever, but it's all part of our, planting more and more trees and so forth. We do need it, and I agree with it, but clarified, and he's going to add that in.
Okay. Yes.
That's it. Except one later.
I do have one question, and Mr. Royce reminded me of it. So the 6 foot it's essentially the ADA requirement, so you can have a wheelchair and essentially a stroller requirement as well, apparently, in this town, too. Is there any requirement for height?
Yes.
What is that? Because I can tell you we're not living up to it, and Mr. Grocott and I have brought this up multiple times. I'm tall, but I'm not exceptionally tall, so it's not just me.
Short, but I'm not exceptionally short.
Here's some openings, some layout openings. You can see this is a front of a restaurant, for instance. And here's the way it works in our sidewalk in the downtown area, and it's that's the 6 foot area that you are required.
Nothing can hang over the 6 foot area.
You can have, let's take a look at some.
Because I'm talking about the awnings that I get.
Right, and you're talking about like furniture and awnings
Yeah.
and things like that, and I believe there's a 7 foot limitation on that.
I'm not that tall.
On the overhangs. And there's the fees. It's a one-time code compliance certificate, annual encroachment. That's the annual encroachment permit to be in the right-of-way of 239 and other fees.
But it's a one-time fee.
Yeah, except for the encroachment permit is an annual basis.
Okay.
That's to be in our right-of-way. But the compliance certificate, which is the initial application, is a one-time fee. And we just put in some other city fees to give you an example of how that works. Now, I'm going to ask one of my staff if they recall if it's 7 feet, but I believe it's 7 feet for the umbrellas. There it is. Awnings must be 7 feet above grade. And then
how do we essentially regulate that?
Awning's not an umbrella, right?
Yeah, and an awning also is not an umbrella.
Awning is fixed to a building.
Well, what we currently do, what we currently do is we tell the restaurateurs and the business owners to move it up if it's too low. I mean, that is literally how we ask them to comply with this. And I know it has been an issue. I have been approached by restaurateurs in the past that are concerned, particularly on the east side of the street, where you get the sun in the afternoon. I know the restaurateurs, and they have complained about this issue. But I believe this is an ADA issue as well, and it's where our hands are a bit tied in that regard, and we work with them where we can.
Okay, because I'm just, and I have no scientific data. They're violating both the 6 feet ground requirement and the 7 foot height requirement every single day. And it's an issue. It's an issue if you can't walk next to somebody, and we're not 6 feet wide, how does someone in a wheelchair get through?
Right.
And then how does someone, Mr. Grocott and I, neither of us are 7 feet tall, and we get clipped all the time, so.
And we get complaints from the public a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just,
I get complaints.
we get complaints from both sides, and so it's that balance you're trying to strike in the downtown. It's difficult, but if we get a complaint, we go out and we have a code compliance officer talk to the restaurant.
Okay, so you guys don't actually have to see it. If you get a complaint, you'll just go and talk to the restaurant, because a lot of this happens at night when our code compliance officer is off.
And that may be less of an issue now that we're going with a different code compliance model, and we may be able to get some compliance in the evening hours too.
Okay. Mr. Grisilli, still out?
Nope, I'm good.
Mr. Lewis?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Grocott, Mr. Royce, it's your show.
Do you want never mind.
Okay.
Public?
I've got 3 questions. You want me to just go through them?
Yep.
Okay.
And Mr. Royce, you have one. Okay.
So this one may be too difficult, Al, but I just want to ask it anyways, because I have we talk about jobs, housing, balance. And I'm a strong believer that if each municipality looked at that individually as much as possible when they go through this kind of thing and tried to reasonably create that balance, we wouldn't have the issues we have regionally. And I know San Carlos probably is on the flip side, where we have more housing than we have jobs here in town. That's why you go out to Edgewood or Holly and you see people leaving in the morning and coming back in the afternoon. But do you have any idea at all of the balance that, if this were fully implemented, the zoning and the maps that we did and everything, is there any idea at all that staff look at that, what the balance would be?
We did as part of the general plan update process, but not part of the zoning update process. The general plan, there was a lot of discussion at the GPAC level about jobs and, what do we want as a community? Do we want to bring in jobs, and what kind of jobs? And you should be, I think, one of the tenets was, if you live here or if you work here, you should be able to also live in the community that you work in. Mm-hmm. So those issues were discussed in great detail at that level. And in terms of, how many jobs were created, and it really goes to the square feet that was proposed as the build-out for the general plan, and that the square feet of certain industries, commercial, industrial, office, and retail, were considered in terms of, how much. And you can figure out the jobs based on, for instance, an office space is generally 300 square feet per employee.
Yeah.
And so we did that work at the general plan phase. And so and that's what you're seeing too in terms of the recommendations here for the industrial professional zone and in the industrial arts zone, because they're two different kinds of jobs. And you're trying to attract good paying jobs to your community while maintaining, the service related jobs that we have here that are just as important to people. And so, yes, there's consideration there in the zoning, I think, for those tenants in the general plan.
Okay. And so that would explain also when you were talking about the setbacks and the height limits that you're looking at in the transition zones, the two different transition zones, you're trying to maintain some type of ratio, square footage ratio for for sites.
That's correct, to make those viable, buildable projects and retain some economic integrity, and so that if change does occur, it makes sense to redevelop. Otherwise, nothing will occur.
Right, okay. And then my last two questions, I'm going to just lump them together. I was trying to imagine, okay, what if I'm coming into town and I want to put in a church or a synagogue or some type of faith assembly application? What does this do to me? Is it really, really difficult? Because I know some cities it is. The church I go to right now is looking at new campus, and in fact, they looked at San Carlos. And I think that's something, this thing is really heavy on residential. It's really heavy on business. It's very light in two areas, and so I'll even throw out my other question is, what if I were coming into San Carlos and I said, I want to put a private high school in San Carlos, or I want to put a college campus extension here in San Carlos. These are things I've talked about before from the dais. What does this zoning, what do these zoning ordinances do to me?
And you want to try that one? Because I can take a crack at the beginning, but go ahead, Michael.
Well, the idea is to make it easy for those activities to be heard. But there would be a discretionary review process, a conditional use permit for community assembly and for private schools in the residential districts. I'm just going to look quickly at the mixed use. But the rationale there is that they are activities for which there's a specific context that may need to be considered, and the public input may be important. So I think that the process will be straightforward and welcoming to those kinds of institutions, and there also are specific criteria I mentioned in terms of the reasonable accommodations. If the standards don't quite work, there is an administrative process which follows federal law to make sure that you can accommodate those, just like with the ADA issues, that you can do that. So too for community assembly. And what we're trying to do in these is to not call out, the churches or synagogues separately from any community assembly, and say too that schools, public or private, are equally welcome. And you're just concerned about the edge conditions. Usually you want to see that they have, landscaped and made that setback similar to the districts that they abut. But if you remember the public and semi-public district, it's really, we paid attention to it, but we didn't want to overregulate it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the thinking behind that whole approach. Did you want to add something?
So the answer to my question is, it can be done. It's a conditional use permit in all districts?
Just a bit, yes it is, and that is correct.
Whether it's industrial, commercial, or residential, or mixed use?
Right, there are some park and open space districts where you don't want those structures. So it's not all districts where you'd allow some development. The conditional use permit would be similar to all the uses, colleges, hospitals, everyone's having to come before the commission and have their project considered. So the rules are the same for community assembly as for all these other institutional activities.
Okay, all right. That's it then.
Mr. Rose?
Yeah, thank you. So my last item, if actually you refer to our August 11 St. Carlos zoning ordinances and go to page 129. This deals with, and this came up with this council 2 or 3 years ago when we were talking about the general plan. This is the restrictions that are placed along the creek, top of bank, I guess is what you'd call it. And of course, our building code restricts any construction. When you have your home and you got a creek in the back, you have to stay within 25 feet of the top of bank. That makes a lot of sense. That's your home, the construction of the building itself. And what the discussion was a few years ago was that I live along a creek. We have creeks on Eden. We have them on Carmelita. And you could realize as you go out your backyard and you go out into the back, what goes in the very back? Well, a lot of times it's the playground, it's the plastic or wood play structure that's built up 7 or 8 feet. And of course, it's a beautiful view of the creek and the backyard. Your work shed, where you keep your tools. Some people have hot tubs. Again, is that a permanent construction? More of temporary. But you're using, basically freeing the center of your yard. You're trying to create usage of the space on the perimeter and stay, of course, away from the creek, but not 25 feet. That's a lot of space. So, in fact, there's properties along Carmelita that have wells that are probably 5 or 10 feet from the top of the top of bank. You're not going to. The well goes near where the creek is. So one of the proposals I have here, and again, this I thought was changed when we talked about it a couple of years ago. I talked to Al, and he said, no, you can't put stuff 25 feet within the top of creek. And I got all sorts of stuff within 25 feet. And every person that lives on a creek has all this stuff. They have, like I said, the list of things from a greenhouse to work sheds to playhouses. I have a compost pile that I have fairly close to the creek. So I would like to use my whole property. So my proposal to council here would be we need to make a change here. I think the 25 restriction of construction, keep that away from the creek. But what I would call more temporary structures, as ones that I've listed here, I think people should be allowed to put things within certain footage of the top of bank.
Okay, so is there a question there, Mr. Royce?
No, it's not. It's a proposal for
Okay, so
change.
we'll bring that up during discussion. Not a problem. We're all good with questions? Okay, then we're going to go to public comments. We have Scott Marsters, Ben Fuller, David Crabb, and Ron Collins.
City Council members and Mayor Klein. I heard Al talk about tweaking things, and there's been a lot of work to address a lot of concerns in the city, and I think the zoning ordinance has addressed a huge number of issues and concerns that a lot of people have, and that's good to see. There are a couple of issues that, in talking with either businesses or residents of the east side, that I would like to suggest, and I'm hoping that maybe you have a copy of the zoning ordinance in front of you, and you can turn to page 102. And so there's sort of one of these that addresses a concern of the residents and one that addresses a concern of businesses. And so under Chapter 18.07, Industrial Districts, under Section 18.07.030 Development Standards, and under Additional Development Standards, and then under Transitional Standards, there are 3 conditions. And the first one is sort of complicated and creates this stepwise stepping away from the single-family homes in this transition zone, because in both cases here, these are single-family homes adjacent to industrial parcels. So the changes that I would like to suggest are, for number 1, the maximum height of any building on the adjacent industrial parcel is 50 feet. A conditional use permit is required for any structure over 35 feet. This really addresses a concern of the residential neighborhood, particularly of 75-foot buildings on parcels right next to single-family homes. And it really addresses their concerns for height and on property that's right next to the single-family homes. The second one really actually goes the other way, and it's a change to number 2, and that is that in the IL district, which is the district north of Holly that abuts the residential neighborhood, the building setback from an RS district boundary shall be 15 feet for the interior side yards and 30 feet for the rear yards. That's exactly the way it is right now. But what changes is in the area south of Holly, where the single-family homes abut an IH district, the setback is currently in the zoning code is 30 feet. And if you do that, you've really restricted those businesses that are along Terminal, because now they have a 30-foot setback in the back, and you have a you have to create parking in the front. And so what you've done is you've created this building that is now got this empty space in the back and this parking in the front, and you've squished the building so that now it actually has to be extremely tall in order to generate the floor-to-area ratio that is worthwhile. So what I would like to suggest is that in that area, the IH district, the building setback from an RS district boundary shall be 10 feet for the rear yards, with a maximum height of 20 feet within 30 feet of the RS district. So essentially, what's there right now are concrete walls that are right on the property line. And instead of moving those back 30 feet, let's think about only moving them back 10 feet, keeping that 10-foot landscaping buffer that's there, and giving those property owners the ability to actually develop more on that property. It's really about balance for me. It's looking at these properties and saying, you know, giving the businesses that and the property owners that have these businesses the right to develop as much as they possibly can, at the same time balancing the property values and the single-family homes that are adjacent to these properties. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marsters. Ben Fuller and then David Crabb, followed by Ron Collins and then Mark Olbert.
I just want to say I really appreciate the conversation you guys have been holding tonight. It's always fun to come here and watch. And I also want to thank Randy, Councilman Royce, and Councilman Lewis for serving on the council, because I know that we're coming to some switches, but you guys do a great job, so I appreciate it. I wanted to talk about something really specific, which is Taylor and industrial, and what Scott just referred to, and how those abut Northwood and Fairfield in the northeast San Carlos part of Greater East San Carlos. And as it's currently planned, there could be up to a 75-foot building right across from a 12-foot house, and or 14 feet. And we always say that these are 28-foot homes, but I think we have about maybe 10 28-foot homes in the entire Greater East San Carlos area. They're 14-foot homes. And so I really like the suggestion, and we did meet with a number of people last night. I've been spending a lot of time on this, of enabling something to go up to 50 feet with a conditional use permit, that we could then have a conversation about in the future, kick the can down the road, so to speak. But really stopping something at 35 feet that would be directly next to a 14-foot home. So that's the main issue that matters to us. Reading the tea leaves, I fear we're going to just lose this battle. And what I would say is that while there has been some openness to hearing our views, I haven't found there to be much openness to changing things. And one last point is that the business owners themselves seem to be comfortable with 35 feet. And we've heard that from a number of sources. And so just to create this maximum flexibility to have a 75-foot building, next to a 14-foot home seems irrational, and that even 50 feet is a lot. So thank you very much.
Mr. Crabb, followed by Ron Collins and Mark Olbert.
I am David Crabb. This time I'm speaking in behalf of the Sustainable Land Use Committee of the Sierra Club. And first I want to remind you that we sent the council a letter back in September expecting this to be heard, a lot of time ago, so you do have a letter on file of what we're doing. Basically, you're probably wondering why the Sierra Club's interested in the zoning code. After all, aren't we the ones that have been typically trying to slow down development, not encourage it? Well, the past few years, we've come to understand that our mission is to protect open space, preserve wildlife, and reduce greenhouse gases is directly affected by traffic congestion and how and where we develop new roads and buildings within our communities. Thus, we find ourselves promoting the concentration of higher density housing, businesses, and retail within existing downtown areas and along significant transportation corridors to reduce auto traffic, air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and direct new development away from our wilderness areas, and also away from our single-family housing developments. We feel the city's recent general plan update and the proposed new zoning ordinance go a long way towards supporting these sustainability land use goals, and we're very supportive of that effort. We especially like the commitment to form-based codes, which directs developers to include greater articulation and architectural character in the design of their developments. We like the addition of the new mixed-use zones to design new higher-density multi-use developments in the downtown area and at the Caltrain station. We like the inclusion of landscape design principles, which encourage the use of natural, native, and drought-resistant landscaping. Especially like the idea of unbundled parking to encourage people to maybe use cars less or have one less car in a family if you don't have to pay for the parking space. We like the fact that they've actually reduced some parking standards in the mixed-use zone areas, which again, we are trying to discourage single-family automobiles as much as possible. And we especially like the requirement of a transportation demand management program. And I thought that the ordinance did a fantastic job of listing the alternatives that are under that traffic demand management program that a developer can look at to meet those criteria. That said, we do have a couple of suggestions for improvement. One is that we'd actually like to see the multifamily and mixed-use densities actually exceed the 50 to 59 units per acre along the right near Caltrain and down the transportation corridor. That'll bring more people into the area who will shop downtown and use public transit. We'd like to think, we assume that height limits could still remain as presently proposed, the density could be, is never related to height. It's depending on what size units you have. So if you have more studio units, we can have more density, more people, but still keep the height density, or the height and bulk requirements that have been the big issue. We'd also actually like to see further reduced requirements in the parking in the transit-oriented development areas down to 1.3 cars per unit. Some studies have shown that this is generally adequate for true transit-oriented development. And the last thing, which got a lot of encouragement from the Planning Commission, is we'd like to encourage this idea of parklets as an alternative on-street parking in downtown. This is where a business is willing to give up 2 or 3 on-street parking spaces in front of its establishment for a pedestrian-oriented area to be used to widen the sidewalk for outdoor eating, pedestrian enjoyment, sculpture, or landscaping to enhance the public's walking experience. Menlo Park has done a fantastic job on Castro to do this, where they've set the places you can park your cars, or if the restaurant decides that they don't want that, they bring their seating out to the street. And I think we could possibly do that along Laurel Street in a few locations. Now that, especially since we're talking about building a new parking garage in Wheeler Plaza, and encourage the people to park there. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Okay, we have Ron Collins, followed by Mark Olbert, and then Bonnie McClure.
I'm here tonight representing myself. As a member of EDAC, I voted in September for the recommended zoning ordinance that you're considering tonight. The members of the East Side recently asked me and a fellow EDAC member, Tom Knutson, to meet with them, which we did, and we listened to their concerns. As a result, I now think the East Side's ideas of proposing a requirement of a conditional use permit over 35 feet and a 50-foot height limit in the East Side transitional areas, I think they have some genuine merit and they deserve your consideration. Thank you.
Mark Olbert, Bonnie McClure, and then Tom Knutson.
Good evening, folks. I'll be really brief in recognition of the hour. And actually what I want to say is somewhat similar to what Ron said just now. I hope that when you look at making adjustments to some of the proposals, that one of the things that you'll consider doing is in fact to incorporate some of the, whether it's exactly what they've asked for or whether it's something different, some of the proposals made by the East Side homeowners. I do think it's, we all recognize San Carlos is primarily a residential community. It has to work for the people who live here. I know that's everybody's desire, and I just think that while there's been a lot of great adjustments made to the plan, and I actually like a lot of the elements that are in it and that are proposed as new, I think it would be even nicer to move a little further in that direction. Thanks.
Okay, Bonnie McClure, and then Tom Knutson.
Bonnie McClure, you have my letter from September, and I'm not speaking for Sierra Club. I'm speaking as a resident tonight, and because David's covered our remarks. Coming from almost 50 years of construction experience and having scheduled work up and down the peninsula, and also in the city, I really feel that 8 to 4:30 is a very good work time, particularly in our temperate climate. And serving on the Residential Review Committee, I mean, we are inundated with complaints from residents that don't like the 7 o'clock starting time. And, if Palo Alto and in Los Altos and all the other communities that are hotter than we are agreeing to 8 to 4:30, why don't we go to the 8 to 4:30? Just a suggestion. Okay, the other thing is I really would like to agree with Scott Marsters. I think he has a well-balanced suggestion for the East Side. And so I hope you put down what he said, both points. And then the third thing that I would address is just a suggestion for the Planning Commission, for your architectural review, for your commercial and industrial and multi-use buildings. I really suggest you get an architectural committee that actually has architects and designers on it, because often on the planning commission, you have lawyers and businessmen. And I think you really need a review committee that is able to give some advice. Staff's very good about it, but I know you think it should be community members, but I'm already feeling the lack on residential review of, we lost a real good person when our interior design consultant retired last month.
Thank you, Bonnie. Tom Knutson?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Thomas Knutson. I am a member of EDAC, but tonight I'm speaking on my own behalf, for myself. I'd like to use my time to talk about Terminal Way. I'm in support of the proposed change of the transitional setback for IH industrial parcels along Terminal from 30 feet to 10 feet on the ground floor in exchange for conditionally permitting maximum building height. I feel that this change will enhance the usability and developability of the industrial commercial properties along Terminal Way. Under the proposed zoning ordinance you have in front of you, property owners along Terminal Way are subject to a 50-foot height limit and a 30-foot setback on the rear of their parcel. Now, these parcels are really tiny. They're about 90 feet deep. So 30 feet represents about a third of the property, and some are only 6,000 square feet in size, which means if you want to use the rear for parking, you'd have to commit an additional 10 to 20 feet along the side of the parcel to get a driveway in. Under this alternate plan, the properties are subject to a 50-foot conditional height limit and only a 10-foot setback on the ground floor. This has the potential to increase developable ground floor space, which, as you might know, in industrial spaces is the most valuable component. And it allows the owner to continue to orient the business end of the building towards the street. And by business end, that will mean the noise and the commotion and all the parking traffic and all the forklifts will now be facing Terminal instead of facing the residences, which I think will cut down on noise complaints. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Knutson. All right, we'll go into our discussion now. So we'll take some general comments first, and then I wrote a list of all the recommended changes. We'll go down that one by one. So we'll start with general comments. Mr. Lewis, do you have any?
And maybe just sort of a question. Al, could you talk about the height limits? I believe that what was part of the philosophy about keeping the 50 feet versus 35 feet, or even up to 75 feet with conditional use permit? Is there an economic policy behind it that you like usable space for types of businesses? Can you just describe the thinking?
Let me, and because I was provided with an email with the suggestions that had been made, I was able to prepare an illustration and use this to discuss your question. And one of the issues is, from an economic standpoint and developability standpoint, is some of the industrial type businesses and the service related businesses need a high ceiling height in order to get storage materials or certain types of equipment inside to work. And so that's what necessitates a higher ceiling height for a couple of stories. So you may have a 25-foot height because of the type of things that you're doing in that location. And so that was part of the consideration, is that if you go down too low, it limits the floor area. One of the other considerations here, so it's the type of use, the type of equipment, the type of storage, what the needs are, the types of businesses here. And then the floor area ratio issues, so it was an economic consideration. And so, again, it was trying to strike a balance between the neighborhood protections and what is economically feasible. So in the configuration that has been suggested, there's a couple of things to it. One is what I have heard is suggested is a 10-foot rear yard setback up to 20 feet. And then you could go into let's see, 10 feet at 20 feet, and then you'd go into 30 feet where you could raise it up to 35 feet. And that's what that red line. So this is what that configuration would look like. That would be the permitted configuration as being proposed. Then the rest of it would be from 35 to 50 would be a conditional use permit. Under this configuration, one of the things you see at the rear is the parking area, and because these lots are so small along here, they're not very deep and they're not very wide. What we saw in the aerial photographs is that all the parking was in the front. Now we're pushing the buildings out toward the street so that there's the distance in the back and the height is pushed up toward the street. So this 30-foot setback actually allowed for the back out area for the vehicles, and the vehicle parking would then be underneath the building to make this all work. In this configuration, as I think one of the speakers noted, there would be nowhere for the parking in this configuration. So the parking would have to be in the front of the property or inside the building or on the side of the property, further reducing the buildable area. So that's the difficulty with this particular component of the setback. One of the things that EDAC did discuss as part of the economic discussion is that these industrial uses like to have ground floor. That's the most important thing for some of the industrial type uses. And so that was discussed at EDAC, is to increase the floor area but bring the building closer to the house as a compromise. And then and so that was part of the discussion at EDAC. It was part of the discussion, but EDAC never made a formal recommendation on that issue. But again, from a staff perspective, from a developability standpoint, where does the parking go? That creates a real difficulty for the developer or the property owner. However, as part of the discussion in your consideration of alternatives, the height of 35 feet, this is part of perhaps an alternative that you would consider is, well, everything above 35 feet, we're not saying you can't do it, but we're saying that a conditional use permit, and this is a discretionary process with the community, that if you go from 35 to 50, then you have to go to the planning commission with this. So it's sort of, again, it's one of those balancing approaches that I think has been considered all along.
Right, certainly with a lot of times we see when it's in the zoning, in the code, there's a certain sense of entitlement at that point. So the conditional use helps where we can sort of pass judgment on different types of projects, which means we can stay in touch with the community on those things, which would probably be a good idea. Do you have a sense for, it seems like 10 feet or 30 feet, does 20 feet get you parking in the rear still with an underhang? I'm just
It really
trying to. Doesn't?
Well, you need about, it depends on the kind of parking, if it's angled, if it's straight back.
I'm just trying to get cars off the street so you can achieve both things, still keep a border between the residential, but it just feels like I'm just wondering if, can we get, take our half out of the middle?
Yeah, I understand. You need about 20 to 24 feet of backup space for straight-in parking. That's what you'd have here. You wouldn't have angled parking underneath the building. It would be straight-in parking. So you need to be able to maneuver like this vehicle is doing here. So the 30 feet is actually really, and plus you got a 10-foot buffer zone of landscaping. So that also adds to the difficulty here. Again, it's adding, trying to get an array of things that work. So you really do need the 30 just to make the parking, the backup space barely kind of work, and you're even working in between the trees and maybe even in some cases here to get out.
Good.
So 30 feet is minimum.
Okay. Did you analyze the other compromise on the other area that?
Yes. So this is the configuration for the other side in the light industrial district along Taylor. So Taylor would be out here and again residential here. So what is being proposed here, if I understood correctly, is maintain that 30-foot setback, allow for a 35-foot height, and anything from 35 to 50, you get a CUP. So it's less of a transition. You're just saying straight across 35 and 30 at the rear, and I think that's what I heard.
And how does the FAR work out on that, the math on that?
The math works out better because they're such big lots, so you can get your FAR here in a number of different configurations. Again, it's because you have so much flexibility because of the lot size. On the other side, again, things are so constrained that it's much more difficult. So here, this offers a lot of flexibility. You can get the parking at the rear, you can get the parking on the side, still achieve your floor area ratio.
Great, thank you.
Bob?
No, Mr. Lewis has brought up a couple of points that I was going to do. So.
Okay, Mr. Royce?
Mr. Mayor, just before you continue, I just wanted to make sure you didn't intend to, or intended to close the public hearing when you went to discussion.
Can we close, can someone make a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. So seconded. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Okay, Mr. Royce.
Yeah, just a comment about the process. I'm a little concerned because I know there's been so much work put onto this. I mean, I was looking at this stuff a month and a half ago, and we've had workshops and 3 planning commission meetings, 3 other meetings from the other groups and so forth, and with downtown vendors, with HIA and all these groups, and I could see some negotiations and some good changes. It documents what those changes are. And then, this morning, I think all council and myself got a memo of a meeting last night. I mean, here it is. I'm looking at this thing 10 hours before council meeting, and I'm trying to think, what's going on here? I know our council operates on an efficiency standard that says we work things out, we talk, we get public input, and we vote. It doesn't matter if it's 3-2 or 5-0. A decision's made, we move forward. And tonight, I'm a little uncomfortable because I see members of those organizations who voted. I mean, I think Planning Commission voted 5-0 on all this stuff, who now have come 10 hours before with this letter and the same day and questioning decisions that they've made. But as an individual, they're really not supporting what they're doing on planning. And so I just throw out the uncomfortableness I have of a last minute data that we get on something as important as this.
Okay, Mr. Grocott?
Mr. Mayor, through the chair, I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 10:45, please.
Is there a second?
Second?
Anyone opposed? Okay. Mr. Grocott?
Since we're talking about this issue of that, especially on terminal, it seems to be a bigger issue. And I'm looking at your graphic, and I'm wondering a little bit, does it have to be one or the other? Could it not be both? Give the developer the option. If you want a 30-foot, then you can automatically, what was it, you had it at 50? The height was at 50? Was it a 30-50 situation? 30-foot setback, 50-foot height building?
On the other side, on the terminal side? Or
Yeah,
on
on the
side?
terminal side.
Let's go back to
30,
that.
35 with a up to 50 with a conditional use permit.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, the gray area is what is being proposed by the planning commission, is being recommended by the planning commission, this. So it's.
Can you explain what that is? Yeah,
Yes.
it's 30 feet.
So it's 30 feet setback, up to 30 feet high. 40 feet setback up to 40 feet high, 50 feet setback for 50 feet high.
Okay. Now, does the neighborhood just, do they don't like that, or they don't, what I heard from, I think, Mr. Marsters is that they don't see that as economically viable. Because if you're taking a third of the lot, and Mr. Knutson said the same thing, if if it's a 90-foot lot, and you take 30 feet, now you only got 60 left. To get back there to do the parking, you're going to have to take 10 or 20.
Yeah.
So now you don't have that much building footprint left. And you're obviously not going to be building out to the sidewalk either. You're going to expect some kind of landscaping or something out front. So that's what I heard, was just they're looking at it more as doesn't seem economically viable, and they were trying to come up with some alternative. In my mind, I look at it and say, okay, you could, offer both. If you want a 30-foot setback, that's what it looks like. If you want to go with 10, then you can do this, what is that, 20-foot high? I don't, would that be a poor form to offer both to developers? Does it have to be one or the other?
I think it'd be fine.
It'd be fine? Okay. All right.
just to jump in on the conversation, I really think the bigger setback in that area, and unless we're here from the east side, that those neighbors really don't care if it's only 10 feet. I would think a 20-foot building, 10 feet back, then does that eliminate the green landscaping zone if it's at 10 feet as well?
No, you keep the,
keep the green zone.
landscaping zone at the 10 feet, but I think the councilman today is give them a little more flexibility. They're still going to have to provide the parking.
Right.
You're giving them some choice. You keep the 10-foot landscaping buffer, and
Right.
you give a little bit of choice because the lots are
Right.
so.
I think I understand it. Personally, I just think 10 feet's not that much for a 20-foot building in somebody's backyard. So that's just maybe my 2 cents.
Okay. So we'll get to that. My only comments are, and I'm going to kind of echo what Mr. Royce said, both of this has been incredibly vetted. And so it's a little disturbing, and I called other members of the Planning Commission and EDAC to ask them their thoughts. And to say they were blindsided would be an understatement. They were upset that members of their commission were getting together and going to recommend something differently after it's been vetted. They expected that the commissions had done their job and it had moved on. And I know we had commissioners speak and say, I'm speaking as an individual, but when multiple commissioners get together, there's an implied reason why people were called into a meeting, and it's because you are commissioners. And there's been some hurt feelings on your commissions, so I would hope you would reach out to certain members and let them know that you didn't mean to essentially do an end around on them, because that's how it came off to many people. And so with that being said, also 10 o'clock at night, if this was the opposite thing, if a group of commissioners and a lobbying group got together and said, we want to go 85 feet permitted, and email us 10 o'clock at night, and we approve that, we would get accused of not having transparency, of not giving people enough time to get used to this. None of the businesses were consulted about this compromise. The compromise they were consulted on was the compromise in the plan. So you just have to think of what was the opposite. If it was the opposite, there'd be a lot of upset people here tonight. So you have to be wary of what you do, because it does offend people at some point. So I'm not going to be, we can talk about into this, but I don't imagine I'll be going with either recommendation. But let's go down the list. So Mr. Royce, you were first up with 7 a.m. to 8 a.m.
And Mr. Mayor, I'm prepared to have an answer for that. Just a little time to recall. This is in the municipal code, and it was indeed, I do recall having a conversation with our building official, Chris Valley, about this, and we do receive a number of calls, and as a member of the public noted. And there's some frustration on staff's part, because in the current municipal code, there's very little restriction on our hours at all, and it doesn't restrict holiday construction or anything. And so the intent of the noise was to be more reasonable to the community, and also we did start to look at other communities, and we looked at several other neighboring cities, and we proposed something that we thought was similar to some of the other communities that we looked at, like Belmont, which is Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5, and then Sunday and holidays, construction is prohibited. We have Menlo Park, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., which is what is being proposed here, and then holiday is an issue. Palo Alto, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturday, 9 to 6. So, but some other communities do allow still for 7 to 6 p.m., such as Woodside is 7:30 to 5:30. So we did look at other cities, and really some of the surrounding cities are at 8 a.m. and restrict on holidays, but we don't. We are one of the most liberal cities in terms of noise control for construction. And again, on staff's part, we just kind of have to tell people, I'm sorry, we can't help you.
Okay, so the change was responding to complaints.
That's correct.
Okay, so Mr. Royce, do you still want to?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Again, my intent was, the contractor themselves protecting, the hardworking guy that's out there. So, but I'm comfortable with that change, I think.
Okay, and Mr. Lewis, you had fences as one of your issues, but do you have an answer for that, Mr. Sabay?
We have two things. The director, if the existing fence is non-conforming, we can specifically clarify. We list a number of features on page 172, and we could add the word fence. So say, just if a street side yard fence, if that's the only problem, then you don't create a nonconformity. So we can add that word fence to eliminate any misunderstanding. You also had the director being able to grant the waiver. The thrust of the requirement was for new construction to...
Right. So are we saying then, just to understand, that for any new construction, even if it's functionally your backyard, but it's the side yard on a corner lot, that the maximum height of that fence is 4 feet?
But you can come in and the director can... Yes.
I understand. But what I'm saying is, in this, if you read it, short of coming down to City Hall, it can only be 4 feet.
That's the idea.
I don't think that's high enough.
So you want to go to 6 feet? Okay. Is there any pushback on that? Or?
There used to be a setback at a certain point. You could go to 6. Do you guys have the number what the setback used to be?
15, I think.
It's 15?
It's a 30-degree sight distance at a corner.
Uh-huh.
So it was mostly at the corners. Yeah.
Right.
And it was a front setback. It was a front yard setback. I believe it's 15 feet.
Yes,
15
that's right.
feet. Yeah. So there was a setback. You couldn't go over 3 feet or 4 feet in the front setback.
I feel like it's a property value hit on corner lots, number one, for resale value. And so I think that's a blindside for a current homeowner. And for most of those lots, I have friends in those lots, that really is their functional backyard. If it's at 4 feet, people walking by on the sidewalk are looking into your family room. I mean, I think that's...
So you would like to go back to the old way?
Absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Grocott, do you...
I'm leaning in that direction,
Okay.
yeah, I know
Mr.
some
Royce?
lots.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Go with him.
Okay. So we'll go back to the old rules.
Okay, the old rules, but that included a sight distance for corners, so you could see around a corner if you're driving.
Yeah.
So that did include that.
It should...
So you're talking about the old zoning codes for the corners, yeah, okay.
Okay. And then, Mr. Lewis, you had yearly sidewalk cleaning requiring restaurants who have outdoor seating to have a yearly steam cleaning. Is that something the council would like to put in there?
I don't know how you, well, I understand where Mr. Lewis is coming from. I don't know how you monitor that. Everybody's on a different day. What is it, is the pizza guy, is it in January and town, is it on February and La Tosca's in March? I don't know. It just seems like a...
Well, and I'm just going to push back a little bit. Mr. Sabay, maybe you can answer. I know San Francisco requires you to do it, and not just restaurants. If you own street frontage, they fine you if you have gum on the streets. And so I remember I heard this big complaint about it. Is this something that the city could do and then bill them? Essentially, like if we do a sidewalk, if you don't repair your sidewalk, we do it, and then you get the bill?
I think that would require some kind of an assessment district that would be downtown-wide. So yes, you could, but you'd have to establish some kind of an assessment district.
I just feel like we're extending an opportunity for them to increase their business, and I like it. I really like it. But it's going to put more usage on city property, and we're going to, there's an associated cost with that. So I would either build it in the fee structure in the future, and we'll do the power washing, or, enforcement may be an issue, Councilmember Grisilli, but you can pretty much, come by and assess whether or not the sidewalk's clean or not.
I have a question on that for council members. Are you thinking in terms of just restaurants or restaurants and cafes and coffee shops as well?
I would say anybody that's using it on a regular basis that's going to, it's going to get dirtier faster, right?
So I think to answer to Mr. Grisilli's concern, one of the things I suppose you could do, a way to enforce it, is when they come in for their annual payment of the, what's the annual payment has to do with using the public right-of-way?
Encroachment fee.
The encroachment fee. You just have to show a receipt that indicates somebody came in and power washed. You show your receipt, you're good.
I mean, it also would allow the city to be able to look and say, if it's not clean and you've been using the sidewalk, that you need to power wash the sidewalk, so, go ahead.
Through the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
You know, as I noted earlier, the city manager and I have talked about doing more street cleaning and the costs associated with those street cleanings. And it does cost the city, let's say $6,000 a year to add one cleaning, let's say of the 3 blocks of Laurel. So it would help if we added some kind of an additional fee onto the fee for that would go, you could do it that way. You could just increase the fee and that would go maybe into the street cleaning fund or something like that, instead of creating a district for that.
So
what
it's
we
just
could do is bring fees back to you at a later date. That this is just the structure of the zoning, the encroachment permits, but the fees we can bring back with that notion in mind. That's one approach.
Is that okay, Mr. Lewis? If we tab that?
It's up to you guys. You'll be on council line one. I feel like we're in a place in history where we're feeing people to death. And I sort of like just the responsibility of, we're going to let you use the sidewalk, we expect you to keep it clean. And so that's my 2 cents.
I want to just throw out one more idea, because I agree with what you're saying there. But there's a way around it without creating an assessment district, and that is to put it in there, as you're suggesting, that you have to do it, and you can just bring your receipt and show that you've done it, and you're good to go. However, as a city, we could also offer and say, we'll do it, and if you don't want to hire somebody, just hire us. I mean, we'll do it. We'll go through, and this is when we're going to go through. And if you want to be a part of that program, just let us know, and then we'll bill you. But if you don't take us up on our offer to do it, then you get it done and show us your receipt.
It could be. I feel like once we have to manage it, then it's staff time to manage. It's staff time to do all that stuff. I guess I was looking for simple language. Yearly power washing of the sidewalk if you have an encroachment fee. And then we could at least enforce it and say it's not clean, you need to clean it. I'm really just looking
I'm with you on that
personal
part.
responsibility and not add too much fee and structure. Just like you need to do it, we can enforce it.
Okay, so we're just going to do it up and down. Are you okay with Mr. Lewis's proposal?
I am.
Mr. Royce? I am as well, Mr. Lewis. And you're a no. Okay, so it's in. Randy, you had an issue with the encroachment fee? Or are you okay with it now?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
And then your stream issue.
Yeah, 25 feet up my last part of my backyard, and everybody else is on the creek.
And in terms of the setback, the minimum setback from the top of bank, that was carried over from the historic top of bank setback from the old zoning ordinance. We didn't change it. So historically, that has been the setback, and the intent is to maintain the riparian corridor and keep silt and debris from it. We do see a lot of debris and all kinds of things in the creeks. And so the 25 feet is to keep all structures and erosion and trash and other debris out of there. And it's even with this setback, we see a lot of debris and construction materials in the riparian area. So we didn't change it. We're just bringing that forward historically. But that's the intent of it, is to keep development away from the creeks.
Okay, and then so, Mr. Royce, your suggestion would be 25 feet for permanent structures, but within the 25 feet, you can have non-permanent structures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Non-permanent, you might have to refine what that definition is, because you have something like a hot tub, you have something like a plastic playground.
Okay.
They're different.
I'm seeing some shaking heads. Mr. Lewis?
It's just a tough thing to sort of regulate.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether or not we would be in adherence of a broader standard, right? I mean, there's broader creek and waterway standards and so forth. So I would say, for my comfort, it needs a little more research. Frankly, to have the creek starting to be populated with freestanding, because if you have to take the openness of that policy to the extreme, and I think there can be some detrimental effects. you know? So, I mean, whether or not you want to look at it and you want to put some limitation, and, I mean, if you look at the, you know, the technical part of it, the bank behind your house, it's a gradual one, right? It's not, there's two different standards.
It's flat.
Right, it's flat, and so.
Distinct.
So it's 25 feet in the flat ones from the center of the creek. I would suggest that it may not be as restrictive as the steeper one, but I think that we're in trouble if we just start to say anybody can put freestanding structures within.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't.
Every house has structures that are against their back wall, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so Mr. Grisilli?
No, I can't support that, Mr. Royce. I think it gives the city at least a chance to as Mr. Savay said, it's been there for a long time. Whether it's been enforced or not, that's another issue. But the point is, if you sort of open it up and don't put a number, if you say, you know, your permanent structure is mine, not permanent structure, and that's the difficulty that I have. I think we should keep the 25 feet.
Okay, Mr. Grocott? Okay, so 25 feet is going to stay. Now we're going to go to the public comment items. So we had for Taylor Way a conditional use permit of anything above 35 feet. Taylor is on the north side. Terminal's the south side. So
Anything above 35 feet with a CUP up to 50?
up to 50. And it currently is, 50 is, up. They have different setbacks if Mr. Savay can go to it. And then anything above 50 is CUP.
And again, just to, you know, both you and Councilmember Royce discussed sort of the methodology of commission members. I would suggest at the retreat, you guys have a discussion about that and decide whether or not, for commission members, you want to talk about sort of different, you know, behavior methodologies if you think that's important. But that would, I didn't want to not respond to the fact that you guys brought that up. I think it's something that we haven't talked about in the past, that specifically, and maybe worth a discussion.
And it rarely happens is why.
Well, I mean, I'm inclined to support the change.
Okay. Mr. Grisilli?
I'm inclined to support the staff.
Okay, I am as well. Mr. Royce?
Staff.
Mr. Grocott?
Well, I'm inclined to compromise on it because I could see on the, there was one where they had the 10-foot and you could go up to 20 feet. And if you just add that as a step in the ladder and then do everything that staff was calling for from there, that would seem to work.
I'm confused as to what you're...
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Can you explain that a little more, Mr. Grocott? So,
Well, he's not on the right graphic right now, so.
well, this is Taylor. We're not talking about terminal yet.
Oh, okay. So this is Taylor.
Yeah, so there's that little red corner at the top that would be added, but there's not a huge addition to the...
So, and I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Grocott, but Mr. Savay, you were, did you say this still penciled?
Yeah, it pencils from a floor area ratio standpoint and a buildability standpoint because the lot sizes are so large. So theoretically, yes, you could get your floor area ratio with this height here. It eliminates, you know, the 75, you know, going up to 75. It requires CUP for the 35 to 50 feet. So those are the changes.
But it would, and I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I was speaking correctly when I said that. Does this, so it, does it, and it would, this would maintain the 30-foot setback?
Yes.
Okay, because I wanted to maintain the 30-foot setback. Okay.
Okay, so Mr. Grocott, what was your compromise here?
It's not on this one, but I like, on this one, I like the idea of a conditional use permit for, I guess it really should be 36 to 50 feet. 35 is
You can get
fine.
35, yeah. Okay, well, we had 3 again, so we can move on then. So next, we'll talk about terminal with your compromise.
Mr. Mayor, through the chair, I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 11 o'clock.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, anyone opposed? Good. Okay, so moving on to terminal now. And this is where Mr. Grocott, we'll see how we sit, because this is the one you were talking about for the compromise. Okay, so terminal is, the suggestion was 20 feet, you give them 20 feet extra or 10, is it 10 feet? I can't read that.
Yeah, it's a 20-foot height at setback of 10 feet.
10 feet, so you give them 20 feet more, but they can only go 20 feet in that 20-foot area.
Yes.
And then everything above 35 feet is a CUP.
Yeah, I think what they're saying is everything within 30 feet is 20 feet high, but you still have to maintain that 10-foot setback. So this area here is 30, it's still in that 30 feet. You can only be 20 feet high.
Okay, so Mr. Survey, give me the 2 big bullet points of why the staff doesn't think this works.
Well, you know, it could work, but your parking would then have to be inside the building.
Okay.
Or the building would have to be cut to this size, like a much smaller size. So your floor area ratio would be reduced to quite small, less than 1, because you have to have parking area. If you pulled in from the street, you'd have to have 20 feet for parking just inside the building. Then you'd be backing right out into the street, which is not safe.
Okay, well, let's go down the line to see if we're going to talk about this further. Mr. Lewis, do you support the change?
No.
You support the staff?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Grocott?
Staff.
Or Crisselli, sorry. Mr. Royce? Mr. Grocott, you had a compromise, but there's 4 for staff, but I would like to hear a compromise, so we weigh it out.
In these transitional areas, the other thing I'd like to see, if I might, is a consistency. So if we're going to do a CUP for 36 to 50, I'd like to see it in both transitional areas, so it's consistent.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add one thing. I think it would work if you had an auto-related business that you were, working on certain kinds of vehicles or doing body work on high-end vehicles where you want everything on the inside.
Yeah, but we're not dictating what businesses go in there. We're just talking about the buildings.
Right. But it would work maybe in that configuration where you didn't care where you park. If you could park it all and take up all your floor area with parking, then it works for that type of specific use.
Okay. Well, we had 4 for the staff, so we can keep going then.
And it's a planning commission recommendation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then we had, by a couple members, one wanted to see us increase the multifamily allowable, I'm spacing on the word, density from higher than 59. Is there anyone who would like to do that? It was in the transit-oriented development zone. Mr. Lewis? No? Priscilla?
Staff, no.
Yeah, staff.
I don't understand.
Increase the density.
So it's 50 to 59 dwelling units per acre on El Camino, in this area, in the transit-oriented development zone, and the recommendation was for us to go higher than that. And I'm seeing no's across the board, so it'll stay as is. Okay, and then there was another brought up about us allowing people to take up parking spaces on Laurel Street for outdoor seating. So a business could say, hey, we want to do a parklet. Yeah, we want to put seating. We're going to take up 4 parking spaces.
Mr. Mayor, if I could talk about that for a minute.
I don't think you might have to. I'm seeing a lot of no's.
Yeah, and I can show you, I have some examples. But
Why don't we see whether we want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure, I'm
You want
sorry.
to talk about
Excuse
that?
me.
No.
No.
No. Okay, so we don't have to talk about it.
Sorry, Al. No parklets.
Maybe. And then there's an 8 to 4:30 work time, but we just agreed on 8 to 6, so I think we're fine on that. And then that's it. That's all we had. So we have a couple motions. Yeah.
Through the chair, I just wanted to say in a general way, Al, and also to the mayor, nice job on about a 4-year process, if I'm not mistaken. We started with general plan, I think when I was mayor, and I think Mayor Klein ended up being the chair of that effort, Mary Jo Hoffman co-chair, if I'm not mistaken. Al, I thought when he started off on it, I mean, he looks as fresh as a daisy tonight. I thought it would be the pictures of the president, you start, and then 4 years later, how you look. But I just want to say it's really nice to see the fruition of something that we had, and I apologize if anybody takes offense to this, but a grossly outdated sort of menu by which people could navigate the city. And I think the spirit of the commission, and Al, you sort of led this process all the way across, and I think you do a phenomenal job of listening to every faction available and we're lucky to have you. So thanks to you, and thank you to the mayor for heading up that effort from the very beginning.
And just to jump in with a couple more comments, because I've been with you since the beginning on this, Mr. Surveyor. You're probably the first staff member minus Ms. Boland who actually knew. This has been a phenomenal job. You can see if you put the two zoning codes next to each other and the two general plans, you can see the extreme difference that they are. We have gone to a form-based code where people can actually look at pictures and see what we're talking about. They don't have to sit and doodle it out, and then it's much more user-friendly. And I think we've gotten that way as a city as well, but it really reflects in our zoning code. All of this across the board were compromises, and that's great because you took the community into effect and you took the economics into effect, and you looked at all the different aspects, and no one walked away getting everything they wanted. It was definitely a well-done plan. Again, thank you to the EDAC and the Planning Commission for all their hard work as well. This has been vetted very well, and I think it's a testament to you and your staff how well we've done with this. So it'll be nice to hold up for the next couple of years. So we have some motions that I need you to put up, Mr. Survey, so we know what we're doing here.
Yes.
And we got to get Bob home in about 10 minutes or he turns into a pumpkin, so. Just because of the grumbling.
He's been fantastic.
It's just because you're here, Brad. Once you go, Mr. Cranky comes back at like 8:30. You keep him on his toes.
I'll be at every meeting in spirit.
So there's motion one. The Planning Commission is recommending that motion. And motion two.
Well, let's do one first.
I just wanted to show you there was two motions there.
All right, so who wants to take this one?
I'll make a motion that the City Council acknowledge the September 2011 corrections to the 2030 General Plan Land Use Map and introduce an ordinance of the City Council adopting San Carlos Municipal Code Title 18 zoning to include the zoning title, text, and zoning district boundary map, including amendments and errata to the August 2011 draft zoning ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Madam Clerk?
Before you vote, you mentioned a lot of amendments. I just want to make sure the amendments defined up there include the amendments you discussed tonight.
Yes, my motion would include those.
Okay, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? Yes. Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. Motion two.
That the City Council introduce an ordinance of the City Council adopting amendments to the San Carlos Municipal Code, Titles 8, 9, 12, 13, as amended, 15, and 17, based on the findings incorporated in the ordinance of the City Council and for the reasons stated in the staff report.
I'll second that.
Including any amendments that we would have made tonight.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Klein?
Yes. And with that, we're done for the evening. Well done, Mr. Survey. Everyone have a good night.